"This house is mine now, Rachel. There's no room for you, so get out." My mother-in-law's cheerful voice filled the room, leaving Bob and me stunned. We had returned home to our city apartment after a successful birth in my hometown, only to find the door unlocked. Fearing an intruder, we cautiously entered, only to be greeted by my mother-in-law sipping tea in the living room, boldly declaring her claim. "My name is Rachel. I met Bob at a social gathering, and later we got married," she announced. From the outset, my mother-in-law had never seemed to approve of Bob and I meeting at such an event. "A woman who attends such a scandalous event will never be my daughter-in-law," she muttered upon our first encounter. But I silenced her with a smile, pointing out that Bob had attended the same scandalous gathering. Of course, the event in question was nothing of the sort. It was merely a gathering hosted by our colleagues from work. My mother-in-law, a single mother who had raised Bob with great care, seemed genuinely saddened when Bob moved out to get married. It appeared that her constant picking on me stemmed from this sadness. However, my strong heart prevented her attacks from having any effect. Frequently invading our home without invitation, my mother-in-law would take the train over, knowing Bob was at work. As someone who only went into the office once a week and worked from home the rest of the time, I couldn't ignore her persistent doorbell ringing and knocking, especially considering the disturbance it caused to the neighbors. Bob, whose job required him to be out every day, was not around during the day to deal with her. My mother-in-law would then proceed to complain about dishes in the sink, laundry piling up, and every other household chore she could find. She would go through every room without hesitation, criticizing any task she saw being done casually. Her catchphrase seemed to be, "Poor Bob, to have such a wife." I should have raised him to expect much higher standards for women. Yet despite her disapproval, Bob's love for me remained unwavering, much to my mother-in-law's dismay. Originally, I had a preference for older, dapper men, but Bob, who is 3 years younger than me, pursued me fervently, leading us to date and eventually marry. Whenever my mother-in-law picked on me, Bob would become very angry. I always reported to him what my mother-in-law said, prompting him to call her and say, "Mom, it's a hassle when you come without calling. Rachel isn't just hanging around at home, she's working." However, despite Bob's efforts, my mother-in-law never stopped coming unannounced. Instead, she often snapped at me, asking why I told Bob everything. Even before giving birth, I had grown accustomed to my mother-in-law's unannounced visits and complaints about housework. I no longer directly confronted her complaints. Instead, without taking my eyes off the computer screen, I casually responded to all her grievances with, I'm sorry, I'll do it next time." Despite my nonchalant attitude, I felt sorry for my mother-in-law, who seemed desperate to torment her daughter-in-law. Bob and I shared the housework, and I didn't pay much attention to my mother-in-law's complaints, simply thinking, she's at it again. However, her words when I reported my pregnancy were particularly harsh. "You're pregnant, child? Is it Bob's?" Bob and I hugged each other in joy, his excitement evident as he gently stroked my flat belly, expressing his eagerness to meet our baby. Yet my mother-in-law seemed to insinuate that I had conceived with another man. Was my instinctive response, which only seemed to fuel my mother-in-law's anger. She continued with a scowl, accusing me, "You've betrayed Bob and conceived a child with another man, haven't you? After all, you're unattractive and 3 years older than Bob. A woman like you and my Bob couldn't possibly have a child." Her confident statement ignited my fury, and I exploded, "That's impossible. Please, go home." With that, my mother-in-law left the house, laughing and taunting, "See, you're angry because I hit the nail on the head. I'm going to report this to Bob." True to her word, my mother-in-law likely told Bob that I was attempting to deceive him into raising a child from another man. But Bob swiftly shut down her accusations with a simple, "That's impossible. Rachel would never hurt me." His laughter and kindness warmed my heart, and I felt genuinely grateful to be married to him. Several months had passed since I discovered I was pregnant, and I had returned to my childhood home to prepare for the birth. Since my family's home was quite far from Bob's office, he usually stayed behind at our apartment. "I missed you when you're not home, Rachel," Bob would tell me. While I found his sentiments sweet, I also cherished the opportunity to spend quality time with my parents in my family home. The day of my labor finally arrived, and as soon as my mother informed Bob, he immediately took time off work and rushed over. Seeing me in pain, Bob held my hand, his eyes welling up with tears as he whispered, "I wish I could take your place." In my delirium from the pain, I yelled back, "Then do it," followed quickly by an apologetic, "Sorry, Rachel, I can't." Of course he couldn't, but Bob remained a steadfast source of encouragement throughout my labor. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I gave birth to our baby. As they placed our tiny newborn in my arms, a warmth flooded over me. Was this what it meant to be a mother? Overwhelmed with emotion, tears streamed down my cheeks. Bob, too, was deeply moved, repeatedly expressing his gratitude towards me. We named our son Jacob and spent several peaceful days at my family's home as we adjusted to our new roles as parents. Returning to our high-rise apartment, we were greeted with an unlocked door and my mother-in-law sipping tea in the living room. Despite her demeanor, acting as if the apartment belonged to her, I was puzzled as to why she was there in our home. "Bob, did you give your mom a key?" I asked quietly. He vehemently shook his head in denial. As I turned to him, puzzled, my mother-in-law snorted and proudly displayed a key she had placed on the table. "I saw the key hanging at the entrance, so I borrowed it to make a copy," she admitted, seemingly pleased with herself. Indeed, we had a key hook at our entrance, but I never imagined my mother-in-law would steal it to make a copy. Taken aback by her audacity, I was startled when my mother-in-law finally noticed Jacob in Bob's arms. With a smile, she looked at Jacob's face and then turned to Bob. "Isn't that Rachel's child with some unknown man, Bob? You don't need to hold him. You're not the victim here. Just go home with me. You don't need to have anything to do with a woman like Rachel." "Are you still claiming that this is our child?" "I don't mind if you have a DNA test done. Why should I have to do that? It's obvious when you look at him. The baby is ugly, just like Rachel. He looks nothing like my handsome Bob." As she spoke, my mother-in-law glanced from Jacob to Bob. But seeing the fury on Bob's face, she froze. Bob's glare was intense, his expression furious. "Bob, I've always told you not to come to our place without asking and not to say mean things to Rachel. And yet you've made a duplicate key and come here. What is this?" I watched as Bob confronted his mother. "I was just trying to protect you." She tried to defend herself. "What you're doing is not protecting me. All you've done is cause trouble for me. Rachel is not ugly. She's beautiful. And Jacob has a cute face. Don't insult my family," Bob asserted firmly. "Your family is supposed to be me, right?" In response to his mother's shaky question, Bob calmly replied, "My family is Rachel and Jacob." While my mother-in-law stood frozen in shock, I quickly gathered up our valuables. "Let's go somewhere else, Bob. Your mom seems to think this is her place." "Where are you going?" she demanded in a shrill voice. "That's none of your business," I cheerfully replied. "You said there's no place for me here, and I have work to do. So, we're moving. Goodbye." With that, Bob and I left the apartment. As we exited, Bob asked, "What should we do? Change the locks?" Considering the impending task of raising Jacob, I couldn't bear the thought of living in a place where my mother-in-law could drop in unannounced every day. "No, let's move. We'll sell the house for now. Perhaps we'll rent a weekly apartment." Agreeing with my proposal, Bob and I temporarily moved into a weekly apartment, ready to start anew. During that time, Bob and I rented an apartment in a new condominium, marking the beginning of our move out of the house my mother-in-law insisted was hers. She genuinely seemed to believe she had a claim to the room in the tower residence where we used to live, and showed a confused expression when I let the movers in, exclaiming, "What's going on?" "This room, you might think is yours, mother-in-law, but it's a house that Bob and I bought. The ownership of this house is Bob's, so you don't have any legal claim," I explained firmly as I held Jacob, observing Bob giving brisk instructions to the movers. My mother-in-law's face turned pale upon hearing this revelation. As she could have just returned to her original house, I wondered why she was so panicked. However, she answered my unspoken question with her next words. "I have nowhere else to live but this house. I've already terminated the contract for my previous apartment," she confessed. I was surprised to learn that the apartment where my mother-in-law lived was a rental, and she had terminated the contract to live in this room. Bob, who had been listening to the conversation from a distance, was also taken aback. My mother-in-law then begged Bob and me, saying, "Please let me live in the house." However, Bob didn't allow it. As a final act of filial piety, he gave her a little money and told her, "You should be able to get back on your feet if you rent a room with this money." Still unable to bear the fact that she was being abandoned by her beloved son, my mother-in-law clung to Bob, crying, "Where will you live, Bob? I'm lonely. Please live with me." But there was no way Bob would agree to that. "I've told you over and over again to stop bullying Rachel, but you didn't stop, Mom. I appreciate that you raised me, but I wanted you to be happy that I've become independent and have a family. You relied too much on me, Mom. I think it's better for both of us if we never see each other again." With that, Bob made his stance clear, bringing an end to the emotional ordeal. At Bob's resolute words, my mother-in-law collapsed in tears, protesting, "No way." However, Bob's determination remained steadfast. Since I hadn't shared the address of our new apartment with her, my mother-in-law could no longer come uninvited. The thought of not having to see her anymore brought immense relief. On the night we completed the move, my mother-in-law, who seemed to have calmed down, called Bob and me numerous times. Busy taking care of Jacob, I hadn't paid attention to my smartphone and was startled to see the large number of missed calls late at night. I quickly set it to reject her calls. As her only son, Bob couldn't completely abandon his mom and took her calls for a while. However, each time Bob answered the phone, she began to spew insults about me. She even accused Bob of being brainwashed by me. Bob, usually kind and patient, seemed to be at his wits' end with the incessant ringing of the phone at all hours of the day and night. "Mom, I've tried not to abandon you because you're my mother and you raised me with care, but I'm at my limit," Bob finally confessed, his voice heavy with emotion. Despite my repeated warnings, my mother-in-law wouldn't stop bad-mouthing Rachel, and I didn't think she would ever change. "Mom, I won't answer the phone anymore, but I hope you can forgive me," Bob expressed, his voice heavy with guilt for having to sever ties with his own mother. It was clear he couldn't bear to hear his wife being disparaged every day. Receiving the declaration of severance, my mother-in-law was in tears on the other end of the phone. However, Bob firmly cut off all ties with her. Despite Bob, the landlord, telling her to vacate within a week, my mother-in-law refused and continued to occupy the empty room. Confused by her refusal to leave, we consulted a lawyer. When we conveyed through the lawyer that we might sue her, it seemed she finally left the house. We weren't sure what kind of life my mother-in-law had been leading since then, but she had been receiving financial support from Bob. Now that it was gone, she must be living a financially strained life. On the other hand, Bob, Jacob, and I were living peacefully in our newly purchased home. We were relieved when a new tenant quickly bought the room in the tower residence that we had decided to give up. Bob took paternity leave, easing the burden of raising our child single-handedly. "You're always working so hard, so I'll pick up the slack with the house chores during my paternity leave," Bob said, taking the lead in household tasks. Honestly, Bob is such a wonderful husband that I feel he's too good for me. Even when we had to deal with taking over my mother-in-law's house, I'm truly grateful to Bob, who stood with me through that ordeal. Recently, Jacob has learned to crawl and has been exploring the house. I spend my days smiling as I watch him with Bob, feeling grateful for the peaceful life we share. I grew up without the embrace of a mother's love. She left this world shortly after bringing me into it. My father, supported by our extended family, shouldered the responsibility of raising me alone. At 28, I found solace in the arms of my wife, Emma. Together, we were blessed with two beautiful children, and I began to understand the true value of family. But our happiness was short-lived. At 35, Emma, a year younger than me, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Despite her courageous battle with chemotherapy, the disease mercilessly claimed her life at the tender age of 38. The loss of Emma left a void in my heart and in the hearts of our children. Sophia, my mother-in-law, spoke with stoic grace at Emma's funeral, expressing gratitude for my presence in her daughter's life. Yet, her composure shattered as Emma's coffin was placed into the cremation furnace. In a heart-wrenching moment, Sophia pleaded for Emma to wake up, her grief pouring forth in uncontrollable sobs. It was a moment of profound anguish, unmatched in my life. Sophia had known loss before. Emma's father had also succumbed to cancer at a young age. Despite her own pain, Sophia had lovingly raised Emma. Despite the challenges of being a single mother, Emma's life was tragically cut short before her time. After her passing, Sophia came to live with me in our home. It had only been a week since she moved in when something heartwarming happened. As I was preparing to leave for work, unlocking the front door, Sophia hurried to greet me, clutching something in her hands. "Andy, here you go, your lunchbox," she said, offering it to me wrapped in a checkered handkerchief. "When Emma was well, she used to pack your lunch every day, right? Eating out every day can be costly, so I'll take care of it from now on." Approaching 40, I had started to worry about my expanding waistline, but lacking culinary skills, I couldn't bring myself to make my own lunch. "Thank you so much, Mel." I expressed my gratitude. She spoke to me with a motherly tone, reminiscent of sending a child off to school. "Don't space out. Look ahead and walk properly. Take care and have a good day." Tucking the lunchbox into my bag, I headed to work with renewed energy. At lunchtime, I joined my colleague Smith in the break area. "Did you make that lunchbox?" Since Emma passed away, my lunches have been limited to cheap, deep-fried options from the lunchbox shop. "Mama made it for me today," I replied, impressed by the array of vibrant and nutritious dishes packed inside. Sauteed mushrooms and spinach with ginger soy sauce, simmered pumpkin, and pickled carrots filled the box, meticulously prepared by Sophia. I couldn't help but wonder how much time and effort she had put into it. In gratitude, I decided to buy a red carnation on my way home. Upon my return, I handed the empty lunchbox and the bouquet of carnations to Sophia. Surprised and touched, she exclaimed, "Oh my! I've never received such a lovely bouquet, not even from your father. I'm sorry for making you feel obligated." "No, it was my pleasure. I appreciate the effort you put into making such a healthy lunchbox," I assured her, grateful for her kindness and support during a difficult time. Concerned about my health, Mrs. Sophia took the initiative to arrange the side dishes on the dining table, expressing her willingness to continue making lunchboxes for me. "If it's okay with you, Andy, would you let me continue making lunchboxes for you? Since my daughter is no longer here, I feel lonely too. But when I'm cooking for everyone like this, it helps distract me and makes me feel really good." Her words resonated with me deeply. The loneliness I felt after Emma's passing was a constant ache, one I tried to numb with work. So, naturally, my response to Sophia's proposal was immediate. "Of course, I'd love to, but please don't overexert yourself, Mel." Sophia's smile lit up the room as she eagerly accepted. "Great, it's settled. Well, if that's the case, I need to start preparing for tomorrow." Despite her efforts to hide it, I had seen Sophia cry alone in her room numerous times since Emma's death. She always ensured her grief remained unseen and unheard by others. In front of me and the children, she maintained a cheerful demeanor, masking her pain with laughter. Yet I knew she mourned Emma's loss deeply and struggled to find hope in her own life. If making these lunchboxes could bring even a moment of solace to Sophia, it seemed like the least I could do. And so, from that day on, Sophia made lunchboxes for us every day. On days of important business negotiations, she would include a bowl of rice topped with slices of deep-fried pork. When work weighed heavily on my shoulders, she packed lunchboxes filled with my favorite side dishes. As the children entered high school, Sophia took on the additional task of preparing lunchboxes for them as well. Occasionally, she crafted adorable lunchboxes tailored to our daughter's tastes. And then, when I was diagnosed with high cholesterol, during a workplace health checkup, Sophia delved into studying nutrition. There were nights when she burned the midnight oil with her books, and days when I gently urged her not to overexert herself due to her advancing age. But Sophia would just smile brightly in response, insisting, "I'll be fine, Andy. Even at my age, I can't help but enjoy acquiring new knowledge." When I was young, there were wars and all sorts of things going on, so I had fewer opportunities to study what I liked. That's why now, I feel like I've become a college student. In that moment, Sophia's eyes mirrored those of her late wife, Emma. Just as Emma would lose herself in gardening magazines all night long, Sophia now immersed herself in her studies. I once told Emma not to neglect her health in her pursuit of knowledge, to which she replied with the same determination as Sophia. "It's so much fun to expand my knowledge, but I'll be careful. Thank you." It was a moment when I realized that both Emma and Sophia were truly mother and daughter. Time marched on, and I finally reached the day of retirement. Sophia, at 82 years old, remained remarkably energetic and had never been hospitalized. Despite her age, she continued to make my lunchbox every day, ensuring our meals were well-balanced and healthy. On the morning of my last day of work, I received the usual lunchbox from Sophia and headed out. Since losing my wife, I had poured myself into my work, knowing that Sophia took care of the household and our children impeccably. Her nutritious meals contributed to our family's well-being, and thanks to her, I had no health concerns as I reached 60. As I left the house, I turned to Sophia, who stood at the entrance seeing me off. "Thank you very much, Mel, for making my lunchbox every day until today. Thanks to you, I was able to reach retirement safely." Sophia, her back noticeably hunched, immediately settled into seiza, a formal Japanese sitting position, and bowed deeply, touching the floor with 3 fingers. "Thank you for your hard work throughout your career. Just one more day, give it your best." Carrying my lunchbox as usual, I made my way to work. Upon arriving, I stamped the final seal, a task that would typically feel mundane, but on this day, it felt nostalgic. My subordinates bustling around, me, the retiring senior, gently guiding them. Every scene in the workplace felt precious. During the lunch break, I shared my final meal at work with Smith, a colleague who was also retiring. While Sophia's meals could be enjoyed at home, there was a unique sentiment attached to the lunchbox. It seemed to convey a hidden message from the maker, urging me to stay strong and resilient. "Get it together, cheer up. Since you had a drinking party until late last night, let's have a stomach-friendly meal today," Smith joked, recognizing the significance of the occasion. I had looked forward to Sophia's lunchbox every day. No matter how challenging things were at work, eating the lunchbox rejuvenated me. Even when feeling under the weather, properly savoring Sophia's meal helped me push through the afternoon. To Sophia, her daily act of preparing my lunchbox was more than just providing nourishment. It was a gesture of love and support, a silent reminder that I was not alone in facing life's challenges. I was the husband of her daughter, connected not by blood, but by the bonds of marriage. Through Sophia's daily provision of lunchboxes, I experienced a maternal affection that filled a void in my life. In my youth, my grandmother would prepare simple lunchboxes for my school outings, typically consisting of onigiri and rolled omelets. Reflecting on my journey, I carefully unwrapped the lunchbox one day to find a piece of paper atop its contents. It was a letter from Mrs. Sophia, expressing her gratitude. "Andy, thank you for entrusting me with the important task of making lunchboxes. After losing my husband early on, and then my daughter, I struggled daily to find purpose and direction in my life. However, fulfilling this role has brought me immense joy and has sustained me through the darkest times. Even when my daughter was a student, I would wake up early every morning to craft these lunchboxes. However, during that time, I was also balancing a job, leaving me little room to craft elaborate lunchboxes. Nonetheless, I felt a profound sense of achievement in providing nutritious meals for my grown-up son every day. Andy, thank you for allowing me to fulfill the role of a mother once again, Sophia expressed in her letter. As I finished reading her heartfelt words, tears welled up in my eyes. Though Sophia was my stepmother, her love resonated deeply through the lunchboxes she painstakingly prepared. It was because of her efforts that I had safely reached this point in my life. Feeling a reluctance to disturb the sentimentality of the moment, I delicately tucked the letter into my inner pocket and hesitated to lift my chopsticks to eat. However, upon opening the lid of the lunchbox, I was greeted by a simple yet touching message written atop the white rice. Good job. A smile naturally spread across my face, warming my heart. The taste of that final lunchbox was bittersweet, tinged with a hint of saltiness that mirrored the tears in my eyes. On my way home that day, I purchased a bouquet of red carnations and presented it to Sophia alongside the empty lunchbox. With gratitude overflowing, I addressed her as Mom and expressed my heartfelt appreciation for everything she had done. Sophia's initial surprise quickly melted into a gentle, motherly smile, affirming the deep bond that had grown between us.
My name is David Lopez, and I'm just an average office worker. My life is pretty mundane. I go back and forth between work and home every day without anything exciting to talk about. Initially, I had dreams of advancing in my career. But my personality isn't suited for strategic moves, so I often end up with tasks that no one else wants. My inability to refuse assignments works against me. Despite working hard, I remain a regular employee without any notable title. There was a time when I was much happier and smiled more. I married my girlfriend, whom I had been dating since I started working. We had a joyful marriage that motivated me to excel in my job. However, as the years passed, my wife became frustrated with my lack of results at work. She often expressed her irritation, saying, "I'm sorry, I'm doing my best." But she would respond, "How many years and how many times have you said that?" She had hoped marrying me would lead to a better life, but with my low salary, she felt restricted. Mary loved spending on herself, from beauty treatments to clothes. She thought life would be luxurious because I'm a doctor's son, and my father owned a clinic. However, my father, much like me, had a similar personality. He often charged patients minimal fees and provided care without profit, especially for those struggling financially. He believed people would repay when they could, saying, "Money can't be made if you're not alive." Despite coming from a family of doctors, we never lived a wealthy life. As a child, I never felt dissatisfied or questioned this way of living, and I remain proud of my dad to this day. However, Mary decided to marry me assuming I came from a wealthy background, without knowing our true situation. This led to a life completely different from what she had envisioned, and a few years later, she had enough. "I'm done. If this is all we can do, there's no point in being with you. Let's get a divorce," Mary declared one day. "Wait, please. How long do you think I've waited? I'm aging just like you. I need to start over while I still can. I definitely don't want to be a low-income wife like you for the rest of my life," she added harshly, leaving behind only divorce papers. I was angry at myself for not recognizing Mary's true nature and for not being able to prove her wrong with my job performance. 5 years passed, during which I threw myself into work to heal emotional wounds, but my lack of savvy kept me from excelling, leaving me a regular employee. If this continued, what Mary said would come true. I felt utterly miserable. Then, an envelope arrived in my mailbox from Mary. Inside was a wedding invitation. Mary, my ex-wife, whom I hadn't heard from in a long time, was remarrying someone else. Why would my ex-wife send me an invitation? I wondered, noticing the name of a familiar chapel on the postcard. This place, isn't it a super luxurious hotel? Knowing Mary, she must have chosen a wealthy man as her new partner, planning to flaunt her happiness at a lavish hotel wedding just to emphasize the difference between her life now and our life together. I demurred my attendance. I was the one who got dumped, I thought. But maybe, from Mary's perspective, my lack of career success was an unexpected turn of events. After pondering for a while, I sighed deeply and stood up from my seat. This is the last time. I guess I'll just go. Despite knowing attending the wedding would hurt my pride, I decided to go anyway. Perhaps, despite everything, Mary had stayed by my side for several years, even if reluctantly. I could somewhat understand her desire to show me that she's fine and finally happy, as a form of revenge. To an outsider, she might appear kind-hearted. Nevertheless, I chose to attend her wedding. On the day of the wedding, the weather was perfect. I arrived a bit early and sat in the lounge, sipping coffee and staring out of the window. Since it was Mary's second wedding, I recognized a few of her friends whom I had met before. Unexpectedly, I overheard a conversation from the seat next to me. After all, Mary did an amazing job to get this wedding, didn't she? Yeah. It's in a luxury hotel this time. It's a step up from the first one. She used to complain that her first husband was a doctor's son, but when she lifted the lid, he was just an ordinary office worker without money. It's really unexpected, isn't it? Hearing them talk about me without realizing I was there, I felt a sharp pain in my heart. So Mary never truly liked me for who I was. I had realized that when we got divorced, but hearing it from someone else made it even harder. Before she divorced her first husband, she had already set her sights on her current husband. Really well done, Mary. Well calculated, they said. I couldn't believe my ears. So that meant Mary was already in a relationship with her current partner before she even divorced me. My pride was shattered into pieces. She looked down on me so much. But she was the one who was cheating. I started regretting even being at the wedding. Trying to maintain composure, I took another sip of my coffee, but my hand was shaking. Then Mary appeared in front of me, all prepared to move to the bridal room. You really came. You're really a good person, right? She sneered at me. With a sigh, trying to hold back my anger, I responded, consider it my last duty. Glad you could find happiness. I forced a smile, not liking my own attitude. Mary continued to belittle me. Isn't it wonderful? It's incomparable to the time with you. Here's a share of happiness for the poor bachelor. Be grateful, will you? She laughed sarcastically. Just then, a refreshing-looking man spoke to her from behind. It was the groom, her new husband, Richard. Mary, it seems like the relatives have gathered. Let's hurry to the bridal room, he said. Her husband glanced at me briefly and gave a slight nod. I reflexively nodded back. As Richard and Mary were about to pass by me, Richard spoke with a pleasant smile. There's still some time before the ceremony. Please make yourself comfortable. Just then, an older man following Richard, who I assumed was his father, approached me. Excuse me for asking, but may I have your name? Feeling uneasy under his serious gaze, I replied, My name is David Lopez. Is your father a doctor by any chance? The groom's dad suddenly asked, appearing frantic. Staggering a bit under his intense presence, I nodded in response to his question. Immediately, the color drained from the groom's dad's face, and he raised his voice. Richard, the wedding is off right now. What? Dad, what are you talking about? Richard looked caught off guard by this sudden declaration. Panicked and confused by this unexpected turn of events, I hurriedly stood up from my seat, insisting, No, I didn't do anything. Ignoring the commotion around us, the groom's dad began to prostrate himself at my feet. The people around us started murmuring and stirring in confusion. Dad, what are you doing? Please, lift your head, Richard urged his father. But his dad remained bowed down, pressing his forehead to the floor without changing his posture. I was completely lost and had no idea what was happening. Caught in this embarrassing situation, Mary turned red with anger and started to lash out. Can we just talk about this? Lift your head, please. Trying to calm the situation, I persuaded the groom's dad to lift his head. With tears in his eyes, he pleaded for forgiveness, saying, I'm begging for your forgiveness. I've been unfaithful to Dr. Lopez. It seemed that Charles, the groom's dad, had some past connection with my dad, and this connection was crucial to understanding the truth behind the unfolding drama. I listened intently as Charles began to speak, his words hesitant yet filled with emotion. He explained that he and my father were fellow doctors, and the story he recounted dated back to my early childhood. At that time, Charles was a trainee doctor at the hospital where my dad had recently started his own medical practice. My father was highly respected for his skills, having trained at a renowned university hospital. Charles, attending the Associated Medical School, looked up to my dad and volunteered to train at his hospital to learn various techniques. One day, Charles's wife gave birth, but sadly, the baby was found to have a congenital heart defect. The required heart surgery was risky, and other doctors were hesitant to perform it due to low chances of survival. Desperate, Charles turned to my dad for help. My father agreed to perform the heart surgery and successfully saved the baby's life. However, the medical expenses for such a procedure were substantial, and as a trainee doctor at that time, Charles couldn't afford to pay it all at once. Tears streaming down his face, Charles bowed deeply and asked my dad if he could repay the amount in installments. My dad simply laughed and shook his head, saying, "Someday, when you become a great doctor and have the means, come back and repay me. I guarantee you'll definitely become a great doctor." After this incident, Charles was sent abroad to study medicine and didn't return for several years. However, he never forgot his promise to my dad and continued to save money for the repayment. As Charles shared this story with tears in his eyes, it became clear why he was so deeply affected upon learning my identity. His heartfelt commitment to fulfilling his debt to my father showed the profound impact my dad had on his life and career. As Charles continued his story, he explained that upon returning to the United States, he discovered that my dad's hospital had closed down, and their contact information had changed, leading to a loss of touch between them. The weight of being unable to repay the debt had burdened him for years, and upon seeing me at the hotel and noting my resemblance to my dad, he was overcome with emotion. "I'm truly sorry. Please, I'm begging you, let me meet your dad in person and apologize to him," Charles pleaded, his emotions intense. Feeling Charles's deep sincerity, I responded calmly, "That sounds just like something my dad would do. But my dad has already passed away." Upon hearing this news, Charles stood there in shock. "No way, he passed away from cancer just like that, 3 years ago," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. He went on to describe how my dad had continued working tirelessly in various clinics until the end, always putting his patients first. Overwhelmed with emotion, Charles knelt on the floor, breaking down in tears. "Dad, this isn't the place," Richard the groom said, clearly affected by the revelation. "That scar on your chest, that's proof that Dr. Lopes saved your life," Charles explained to Richard, who seemed at a loss for words. "You're able to have a wedding ceremony and be here today, all thanks to Dr. Lopes," Charles continued, bowing to me again. "I want to repay all the kindness that I couldn't repay to your dad." In that moment, I gently lifted Charles's face and extended my hand to help him stand up. "Mr. Charles, I'm really happy just remembering my dad is enough for me," I assured him. "The life my dad saved is now able to celebrate such a wonderful day like today. Being able to connect with proof of my dad's existence brings me happiness, and I'm sure my dad would be happy too." As I expressed these feelings, Charles started crying loudly again, and there were cheers and applause from the onlookers. However, Mary was the only one glaring at me with fury. As the time for the ceremony drew near, it proceeded as scheduled. I had undergone an unexpected experience, and my wounded heart had transformed into feelings of pride and brightness. Afterward, Charles insisted on repaying the medical expenses and the kindness my dad had shown. I ended up receiving a substantial amount of money that he had saved for my dad. Furthermore, Charles's hospital began doing business with my company, significantly boosting my performance, and I finally got promoted. The kindness and compassion my dad had shown had come back to me in such a meaningful way. I cherished this happiness while recalling the serious look in my dad's eyes when he was working. As for Mary, although she was enjoying her second marriage, her husband eventually found out about her past relationship with me and realized that both her previous and current marriages were motivated by money. This led to another divorce for her. I heard about it through the grapevine, and it reminded me of the saying, "What goes around comes around." Like my dad, I live my life believing that even if something doesn't directly benefit me, it could still contribute to someone else's happiness. Today, seeing someone smile again assures me that my life is definitely heading in the right direction. The exchange was deeply emotional, bridging past debts with present gratitude and bringing closure to a chapter of unfinished business between Charles and my late father. I'm a 38-year-old man who got divorced a year ago from my ex-wife, who's 37. We have 2 kids, aged 10 and 7. I get to see the kids half of the month due to our custody arrangement, but I still have to pay child support to my ex-wife because I earn more than she does. Our divorce wasn't friendly. We had a lot of fights towards the end of our marriage, and she changed a lot as a person. During our last argument, she yelled that she regretted marrying me, so I decided to end things and file for divorce. She never tried to reconcile, and it's been a year since. 6 months after our divorce, she started dating someone else, which I found out from a mutual friend. It hurt to see her move on so quickly, but I didn't say anything about it to her. Since then, we've only talked about our kids, and that's it. Although I was hurt by her quick rebound, I always thought she was a good mom, so I didn't want to mess up our family dynamic. Recently, though, she did something that made me question her character. I was away on a business trip for a few days, and I asked her to watch the kids for an extra 3 days until I got back. She agreed, and I even have messages confirming this. However, on the second day of my trip, my son called me upset because his mom had dropped them off at my house. But I wasn't there to let them in. They were left waiting outside in the cold because I wasn't home, and my neighbors were also away. On that day, I had just moved into a new house in a still developing area where most homes were empty. The only occupied house nearby belonged to an older couple who weren't home. I was already anxious when my son called to say they were waiting outside my house, and the neighbors were away. I asked my son to wait as I called my ex-wife, hoping for a quick apology and for her to pick them up. Instead, she callously told me it was my problem because it was technically my turn to have them. Shocked, I pleaded with her to reconsider for the sake of the kids, but she hung up. I texted her, but she replied that she was running late for a date with her boyfriend and wanted to celebrate their 8-month anniversary. By then, my kids had been waiting in the cold for over 35 minutes. With no other choice, I called Child Protective Services, CPS, and explained. They arrived quickly and took the responsibility of driving my kids to my parents' house, which was out of town. My kids were too young to navigate there on their own. My in-laws had passed away before our marriage, and my other relatives in the city couldn't care for them at the moment. My parents' place was the safest option. I'd also reported my ex-wife for neglect and endangerment because my kids were found sitting on my doorstep, using a blanket to stay warm. By the time the authorities arrived, I felt awful when I heard about the state my kids were in, but I was relieved once they were safe at my parents' house. My ex-wife was arrested for negligence soon after I reported the incident, and I went to bed that night feeling validated, knowing my kids were okay and action was being taken. I immediately contacted my lawyer to pursue full custody upon my return, which would mean an end to child support payments. I was eager to make sure my ex-wife faced consequences. We didn't talk for a couple of days, during which I learned she was charged with a misdemeanor. When I got back from my trip, I saw my kids first and we talked about what happened. I apologized for not being there and assured them it wouldn't happen again. As I was going to file for full custody, my oldest seemed strangely relieved by this, which made me question my assumption that my ex-wife was a good mom. She wasn't perfect, but she seemed to care for the kids during our marriage and after the divorce. The kids hadn't raised any concerns about life with their mom until now. After learning that my son seemed happy about the prospect of not living with his mom anymore, I asked him why. He hesitated at first but eventually opened up and revealed that they had been having a tough time at their mom's place. She was extremely strict, suddenly banning them from having any candy or junk food during the time they spent with her each month. They were stuck eating bland, repetitive meals like tasteless porridge and oats for lunch and dinner, with only slightly more variety on weekends like toast with dip. My kids called this sick food, not because it was cool, but because it was what I would give them when they were actually sick and needed something gentle on their stomachs. Their mom claimed this was for their health, but I couldn't understand how a diet lacking in meat and vegetables for half a month was supposed to be healthy. I also couldn't see the harm in letting them have treats occasionally, as long as it wasn't excessive. In fact, I believed it could help them develop a healthier relationship with food in the long run. They also shared that they weren't allowed to do much at their mom's place. No friends over, no sleepovers, and they could only go to school and come straight back. They weren't allowed to buy anything they wanted when she took them shopping, not even toys, books, or clothes. It seemed like she only purchased what she needed, leaving out any extras for them. It's heartbreaking to learn that my kids endured such treatment at their mother's house, staying quiet to avoid her yelling at them. Worst of all, she forbade them from talking to me about it. I had no idea what was happening until they finally opened up. I decided to confront my ex-wife about it. When I called her, she immediately started yelling at me for reporting her to the cops. Ignoring that, I asked her about everything the kids had complained about. Her explanations didn't make sense to me because I paid her enough in child support to cover their needs. Despite this, my kids felt they never had enough to eat, wear, or play with. She claimed she was between jobs and couldn't afford everything for the kids, But that didn't add up because I was also paying her alimony to maintain her standard of living. I argued with her, but she snapped back, saying it was none of my business how she used the money. This angered me because the money I sent her was for our kids, not for her personal use. I suspected she was lying, so my lawyer and I decided to pursue full custody and also sue her for child abuse and neglect, given the circumstances. She already had a criminal case due to leaving the kids out in the cold. While I was away on my trip, it became clear that I needed to take legal action against my ex-wife. It's been about a week and a half since then, and a few days ago she was served with the lawsuit papers. On the day she was served, she called me, putting on a show of fake tears. She hadn't reached out to me before this, and it seemed she was only doing so now because she realized she might lose custody of our kids. I suspected her tears weren't genuine, that she was more concerned about losing the child support that came with custody than actually caring for our children. During our call, I told her plainly that she had brought this situation upon herself and that I could no longer trust her with the kids. She tried to claim she was just messing with me and that she planned to regain custody anyway. I didn't buy it. When she confessed that she couldn't survive without the child support due to being between jobs, it confirmed my suspicions. It seemed she wanted custody primarily for financial reasons, not out of genuine love for our children. I was disgusted by this revelation and was ready to end the call when I overheard her friend, who is an attorney, yelling at her to focus on discussing a lawsuit with me instead of dwelling on the money. My ex-wife then changed tack and urged me to drop the lawsuit, calling it petty and claiming she already had enough on her plate with another ongoing legal issue. However, her previous actions had shown me a side of her that deeply concerned me, and I remained resolute in pursuing custody and holding her accountable for her neglectful behavior towards our children. While I was away and engaged in a custody battle with my ex-wife, I also decided to pursue a child protection lawsuit against her. She complained that none of this was fair and accused me of intentionally trying to hurt her because she had moved on with her life while I hadn't. I found her statement so delusional that I couldn't help but laugh before disconnecting the call. There was no point in arguing with her. After that, I focused on my work and taking care of my kids. I knew my kids wouldn't go back to living with their mother under any circumstances, and I was determined to stop the child support payments as well. I started looking for babysitters for when I was at work. Luckily, my mom was staying with me temporarily to help take care of the kids while I was away. Yesterday, my mom called me at work, urging me to come home quickly because my ex-wife was at the door and refusing to leave without speaking to me. Since I couldn't leave in the middle of a workday, I asked my mom to put her on the phone with me. I warned her that if she continued her disruptive behavior, I would have no choice but to file a restraining order against her. Things escalated further when my ex-wife failed to address my warning and instead complained that I was intentionally making her life difficult. She pleaded for compassion and asked me to drop the lawsuit, citing the mental strain of facing multiple legal challenges simultaneously, the impending custody case and the child protection lawsuit. I had already informed my colleagues and boss about the upcoming court proceedings, and they were supportive as long as my work wasn't affected too much. However, my ex-wife argued that she couldn't afford the time and expenses of legal representation and court appearances because she was currently between jobs. I responded by echoing her own words back at her. This was her problem now, not mine. Admittedly, my response was driven partly by spite due to how she had treated me and our children since our divorce. Despite receiving monthly alimony and child support payments from me, she had deprived our children of a stable home environment and instilled fear in them, preventing them from sharing their experiences with me. I believe my actions were fair given her selfishness, dishonesty, and failure as a mother. I didn't think being straightforward with her was unreasonable, considering the circumstances. However, she broke down on the call, accusing me of being horrible to her. She felt it was unjust that she was not only likely to lose custody of the children, but also facing legal action from me. Despite feeling some guilt about the situation, I maintained that the course of action was necessary. I was pursuing legal action against her for neglecting our children, even though she was already facing charges and dealing with a custody case. Update 1. Hi everyone, it's been 2 days since I last shared here, and I've realized I shouldn't feel guilty thanks to your advice and my parents' support. I'm convinced now that the money I've been sending my ex-wife for the kids isn't being used for them at all. She's spending it on herself. We're not connected on social media, and I haven't been in touch with our mutual friends regularly due to my work. But after talking here and with my parents, I reached out to a couple of friends to gather more information about her financial situation. My kids mentioned to me after my last post that their mom is home most days, but on weekends, she's out for hours and leaves them with neighbors. Sometimes she has relatives babysit overnight and comes back only in the morning. I realized my kids were being silent about this, likely because she instructed them not to talk to me about it. I knew something was off and decided to set aside my morals temporarily to investigate further. I've avoided this because I thought she deserved privacy after our divorce. But I see now it was a mistake. If I hadn't unfollowed her on social media, I might have known more about her life. Through a friend's account, I discovered her social media is full of partying, clubbing, beach trips, and romantic getaways at luxury hotels. It's quite the influencer lifestyle, which shocked me because she portrayed herself as financially struggling. My friends explained they didn't mention this before because they felt it wasn't their place to comment. I distanced myself from old friends after the divorce, trying to avoid reminders of her. But that didn't help. Now that I know the truth, I feel no guilt. She deceived me and mistreated our kids to save money instead of using it for them. She deserves the consequences of her actions. I won't let myself feel sorry for her anymore after what I've discovered. Update 2. Right now, my ex-wife and I are in the midst of a lawsuit, with our second hearing coming up in 2 days. Surprisingly, she quickly gave up on the custody battle and expressed willingness to terminate her parental rights because she couldn't afford her lawyer for all 3 cases. Now the kids are fully under my custody, and I finally feel a sense of relief knowing what's going to happen. Regarding the lawsuit, things are leaning in my favor. However, today her boyfriend made a huge mistake by contacting me. He thought sharing their sob story would make me sympathetic, but it only angered me more. It seemed my ex-wife had prioritized her new relationship of barely a year over her own children, which was unacceptable to me. Fortunately, I recorded the phone call because I initially thought he might threaten me. Instead, he asked me to stop the proceedings, claiming my ex-wife had been working hard since quitting her job after the divorce. She's a freelancer, so money is tight, and she's supporting herself, her kids, and him. When I questioned him about her frequent partying and expensive trips, he had no real answer. He insisted it was all for show and that she was struggling financially. He also mentioned she was paying for his master's degree tuition from her savings. When I heard this, I ended the call and blocked him. It finally clicked where all the money was going and why my children were being deprived despite my regular child support payments. She'll have to face the consequences in court, and I'm determined to ensure she does. Update 3. It's been a while. I want to thank you all for your concern and for checking in on me. I'm doing a lot better now, and so are the kids. They seem really happy here with me and hardly mention their mother these days. As expected, she lost the case, and now she owes me a lot of money. This means she can't continue living it up with her boyfriend and friends like she was doing. It was kind of strange seeing a woman in her late 30s with 2 kids blowing all her money at clubs and on vacations. I don't know what she was thinking. Anyway, I've moved on and have nothing to do with her anymore. Once again, thank you all for your love and support.
As I wrapped up my workday and began my usual route home, thoughts of stopping by the convenience store for snacks crossed my mind. Stepping out of the station, a figure caught my eye, and I instinctively halted in my tracks. There stood Elizabeth, my ex-wife whom I had parted ways with a decade ago. As she saw me, a smile spread across her face, and she waved. I cautiously approached her, glancing around. "Why are you here?" I asked as she handed me an envelope. My name was printed neatly on the white envelope. I turned it over, murmuring, "Is this?" "Yes, it's an invitation to our daughter Jessica's wedding," Elizabeth confirmed. Jessica, our daughter, who should be 23 now, in her 3rd year of work after graduating from vocational school, had found someone special. "Hasn't she?" Elizabeth said with a smile, though she seemed a bit unwell. "Are you okay?" "I'm managing," she replied with a troubled smile, looking away, her tell when she lied. "I really want you to be there, but your parents won't approve, will they?" "I'll handle it," I assured her. "This is a request from Jessica and me. Come to the wedding, Jonathan." How could I refuse a request from them? "Okay, I'll be there." "Really? That's great," Elizabeth said, her smile unchanged. Her smile still made my heart race. Our divorce hadn't been out of hatred. I still had feelings for Elizabeth. Noted, I said. Take care of yourself. Thank you, you too. She disappeared into the crowd, leaving me with the invitation in my hand. Continuing on my way home, I thought about my daughter's upcoming wedding. Jessica, whom Elizabeth and I had cherished and raised together. What kind of person had she chosen? Someone kind and dependable who would love her a lot, no doubt. The thought warmed my heart. A week later, my ex-wife Elizabeth passed away due to illness. As I waited for the mourning period to pass, it coincided with the originally planned wedding date for Jessica. I attended the wedding ceremony as intended. However, upon entering the venue, I was met with an angry shout from my father-in-law. He stormed towards me, his face red with rage, and grabbed me by the collar. "What the heck are you doing here?" he bellowed. "Long time no see, Mr. Johnson. You dare show up here so casually? Know your place. Today is Jessica's wedding. I've been properly invited," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Shut up! A low life like you shouldn't keep bothering Jessica," he snapped back. The confrontation escalated. Elizabeth's parents, who were proud business owners, had always opposed my marriage to Elizabeth due to my orphan status and home-based work. "Mr. Miller, I hope you brought a proper gift," someone chimed in. "Of course, but this is for the bride and groom, not for you. I'll present it later," I replied. "What? A bottom feeder like you can only afford a friend's gift amount?" My father-in-law burst into a loud, vulgar laugh. Just then, Jessica emerged from the dressing room, beaming with joy. "You came? Mom said you'd definitely come," she exclaimed happily upon seeing me. "Of course, I wouldn't miss my beloved daughter's wedding," I replied. "Stay away from Jessica, you low-life," my father-in-law intervened, stepping between us. "What's the problem, Mr. Johnson? Jessica was waiting for me, right?" I tried to reason with him. "Move aside, Grandpa. You shouldn't call such a man your father. He'd abandoned you and Elizabeth, he accused me." I raised my voice in surprise. "You just said abandoned." "Yeah, that's right. You're just a shut in who does nothing but play on the computer all day. You left Elizabeth and Jessica to fend for themselves and never did anything fatherly," he continued harshly. "Who told you that? I saw it with my own eyes. A man should be the pillar of the family, work outside all day. You never did that," he accused, his words cutting deep. He began a long-winded, outdated lecture, and I could feel my patience snapping. "Let's ask Jessica," I interjected. "Was I such a negligent father?" "No way. You always worked from home, took care of Mom when she was sick, took us to aquariums and zoos on days off, and celebrated anniversaries at our favorite restaurant. You were the best parents," Jessica affirmed. "That's right, Mr. Johnson." My daughter's words struck a nerve with my father-in-law, his face turning red with fury. "Jessica, who do you think raised you to this point? Are you trying to embarrass me?" he lashed out. "I was raised by Mom and Dad. That didn't change even after they separated," Jessica declared, hugging me tightly. "Why did you divorce Mom? Why did I have to live with Grandma and Grandpa?" "Jessica, stay away from her. Poverty is contagious," my father-in-law sneered. "It's terrible of you to speak that way about Dad." "Enough, Jessica," he threatened, trying to separate us. "Calm down, Grandpa." The groom intervened as he arrived at the scene. "Mr. Smith, I apologize for the intrusion. This unemployed man of lower status will be promptly removed by me. Don't worry." "No, you're Jessica's father, right?" "I haven't had the chance to greet you yet," I tried to explain. "Ah, no need. A future CEO like you shouldn't bow your head to such a man." My father-in-law positioned himself to block me from the groom's view. "Mr. Miller, Jessica's fiancé comes from a distinguished family and is set to be a CEO. Someone unemployed like you isn't fit to speak to him," he insisted. As the groom leaned forward, trying to get a glimpse of me, he exclaimed in surprise, "Mr. Miller, you are possibly Mr. Smith." "Peter, I can't believe Jessica's father is Mr. Miller. The groom realized. Peter, you know Dad? You know him? He owns the parent company of our business, Peter explained. Huh. At Peter's words, my father-in-law let out a foolish sound. Owner? This man is unemployed. I've mentioned several times that I am the president of a company that operates without an office. My home is my office, and I can work from anywhere. That's impossible. How outdated are your thoughts? Peter responded, dropping a bombshell. Mr. Miller is a prominent figure, even listed on the global billionaire rankings. With these revelations, my in-laws were visibly shaken. Now that I had revealed my true identity, it didn't change much. In fact, I had mentioned my circumstances several times before, but they'd probably never listened. Turning to Jessica, I addressed her earlier question. Jessica, what did your grandparents tell you? I asked. They said I was unemployed and without money, so I abandoned Mom and you. As I recounted my side of the story, I glared at the in-laws. When Mom needed long-term hospitalization, I signed the consent forms they sneaked in divorce papers, hiding the text. I was deceived into signing. I tried to dispute it as fraud at the office, but it was no use. The Johnsons had manipulated everything behind the scenes. Mom and I were forcibly separated and never allowed to see each other. As the truth unfolded, Jessica broke down in tears. Mr. Smith, observing the pale-faced Johnsons, glared at them. How could you misunderstand Mr. Miller, insult him, and make my beloved Jessica so sad? He demanded. I didn't know. I had no idea Mr. Miller was such an incredible man, stammered my father-in-law. That's right. If we knew you had money, we would have, began my mother-in-law, but Mr. Smith cut her off. Money, that's all you think about, ignorant old folks. Don't think you'll get away with this, Mr. Smith declared, making a phone call. It's me. Yes, cancel the investment in Johnson Commerce immediately, Mr. Smith instructed. W what? My father-in-law pleaded. Mr. Smith, please, not that, my mother-in-law added. After a few more calls, Mr. Smith looked at the Johnsons with disdain. Your small company's pride, I'll crush it right now. But it won't even come close to the pain Jessica and Mr. Miller have endured. I'm sorry, he said firmly. Here, I admit it, Mr. Miller. No, Lord Miller, you're a respectable father, my father-in-law conceded. That's right. You have money. You can help us, my mother-in-law chimed in. Security, please escort these people out, Mr. Smith commanded. Security officers promptly escorted the Johnsons away. My mother-in-law screamed about money until the end. Suddenly, my father-in-law became very submissive towards me. Our family had been torn apart by them. Jessica, I'm sorry. I must have caused you a lot of pain. I apologize to my daughter. No, not at all. You know, Dad, I think Mom knew that this would happen at my wedding with you and Peter, Jessica said with a laugh. Just like Elizabeth used to say, our hero will protect you, I added. Ha, I see. I couldn't help but look up to the heavens, almost seeing her image walking down the aisle, something I had always dreamed of, I mused. Elizabeth, you must have wanted to see this, right, Dad? Jessica asked. Yes, Peter is just like you know. Oh, he's handsome, works hard. My hero, Jessica continued, somewhat tickled. Then you'll surely be a great couple. Congratulations, Jessica, I said with pride. Thank you, Jessica replied, taking her final step towards Peter. I felt like I could see Elizabeth gently pushing her forward.
I was bullied a lot in high school, and my mom didn't intervene because she was dating the bully's dad. Years later, when I was 22, I decided to get back at them. I've been away from home for the past 4 years. I left for college at 18 and ended up working there, so I never came back except for occasional visits. Honestly, I did miss my childhood home much because growing up there wasn't pleasant. I was relentlessly bullied for everything. I grew up poor after my dad died when I was 10, so we struggled to make ends meet. Although we had food, it was just enough to get by. I was also very tall and skinny, which made me an easy target for teasing. People called me names like Slender Man, and I tried to brush it off, but it really hurt. High school was the worst. There was a group of girls who enjoyed making fun of me and bullying me, although they picked on everyone. I was a favorite target, which made me insecure about almost everything. My appearance, my home life, everything. I wanted to disappear. Once they bullied me because my jeans were too short because I was tall. I didn't want to bother my mom for a new pair, so I kept wearing them. They wouldn't stop teasing me about it, and I ended up running to the girls' restroom in tears and locked myself in a stall. When I tried to leave, I realized they had locked it from the outside. I could hear them laughing outside until the janitor rescued me. Despite all this, I couldn't do much because of my mom. When I first told her about the bullying, instead of helping me, she told me to stay quiet and ignore it. I never understood why she wanted me to stay silent, no matter how many times I asked. She just kept saying we were too poor to start fights with everyone who made fun of us. My mom was always busy working and couldn't come to school with me to address the bullying issue. She told me to toughen up and not complain about it myself because she didn't want to deal with parents getting involved. I didn't like letting things slide, but I did it for her sake since she worked so hard. After high school, I started college in another state, which was a much-needed fresh start for me. My dad had left me a college fund, and my mom sent me money occasionally. I also worked part-time, which gave me enough money to buy new outfits. People in college were more mature and welcoming, and I didn't face bullying anymore. I only visited home during holidays to see my mom and friends, but I preferred living away from home because it reminded me of tough times. Recently, I returned home for Christmas and planned to surprise my mom with a gift. However, before I could do that, she surprised me by revealing she'd been dating someone for a few months and wanted me to meet him. I was happy for her, considering she'd been single most of her life after my dad passed away. Although she hadn't mentioned him before, I didn't take it personally. She kept his identity a secret, making it a surprise when I finally met her mystery boyfriend. After flying back home a couple of days ago, I'm still seething with anger. When I returned, my mom told me her boyfriend and his kids were there, and she blindfolded me to surprise me in the living room. I was excited to meet them, bringing chocolates and flowers, but when she removed the blindfold, my heart sank. Standing before me was the same girl who bullied me relentlessly in high school, now smiling as if nothing had happened. She held the hand of her younger brother, around 14 or 15 years old. I couldn't focus on what her dad was saying because my head felt fuzzy and strange. After a few moments of shock, I turned and walked upstairs to my room without a word. I locked the door to keep everyone out and tried to calm down. But then my mom came after me, scolding me for being rude and insisting I come back down to apologize to her boyfriend. I interrupted her and asked how long she'd been seeing this man, suspecting she'd been lying to me to keep me visiting so she could spring this on me. Her hesitation confirmed my suspicions. When she admitted it had been nearly 7 years, everything clicked into place. I realized why she never let me complain about bullying. She cared more about protecting this man and his daughter than her own child. I was in disbelief. I told her to leave me alone, unable to stand being around her. She argued, claiming she kept it a secret because she thought I missed my dad and wanted to spare me pain. But that wasn't the reason for my anger. She had lied to me all those years and allowed me to be bullied, even though she could have stopped it by standing up to her boyfriend and teaching his daughter not to bully others. I couldn't forgive her for that betrayal. She tried to explain that when their relationship was new, she didn't want to cause problems because of his daughter's behavior. She defended her actions, but I couldn't accept her excuses. After a while, she left, saying she'd talk to me when I came out of my room and that dinner would be served at 9 o'clock. So I should come down soon. I wasn't in the mood to talk to her or anyone else. I was horrified and angry that my mom had prioritized her relationship with this man over being my mom. Her main focus should have been protecting me, not her romantic relationship. I couldn't understand how she thought her explanation would make me feel okay about the situation. The more I sat in my room thinking about it, the angrier I became. I remembered all the nights I cried myself to sleep in that bed, and it felt incredibly unfair. So I did something rash and probably stupid. I called the police and reported my mother. I wanted to sue her for everything she'd put me through. Instead of going to a lawyer, I called the police and tried to press charges. They arrived shortly after, and it took me some time to explain what had happened. My mother and her boyfriend tried to dismiss it, saying I was being hysterical. The police seemed to understand I was having a breakdown and suggested I talk to a family lawyer. After they left, I was still worked up, feeling a panic attack coming on. My mother flipped out, refusing to let me go back to my room, yelling at me for being ungrateful and calling the cops on her, with her boyfriend agreeing I had gone too far. I wanted to argue back, but I felt my chest tightening and got dizzy. Eventually, I think I collapsed or fainted because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the ER. Apparently, I had passed out due to lack of food, water, and stress. I had refused to eat or drink anything at my mom's house, which explained my condition. The nurse told me I had been unconscious for about an hour, and my mother had been waiting to see me. I felt a bit guilty, but all my anger seemed to fade away. She dropped by to explain that despite understanding my sense of betrayal, she believed her actions were necessary. She insisted there was nothing wrong with prioritizing her own relationship over her daughter. She tried to downplay the seriousness of my bullying experience by saying her boyfriend's daughter meant no harm and it was all in good fun, implying I shouldn't have taken it so seriously. I couldn't believe she was defending her choices and even expecting me to apologize to my bully for involving the law. I told her to leave the room and leave me alone. Since then, I've packed my things and moved to a hotel for the remainder of my stay, and my mother didn't try to stop me. Now, I'm considering suing her for intentionally causing me emotional distress throughout high school and denying me a safe environment to grow up in, despite having the means to intervene. I'm hesitant because it could ruin our relationship and I don't have other family to rely on. However, I feel I can't let this go. I've always let things slide, but this feels too significant to forgive. Despite trying to see things from her perspective, I can't justify her actions, and I feel justified in wanting to take legal action against my mother for failing to protect me from bullying during high school. Update 1. I found out more about my mother and her boyfriend's history. I confided in my friend about what happened recently, and although she was surprised, she mentioned that everyone in our neighborhood knew about it. However, these rumors never reached me because I was quiet and kept to myself. My friend didn't tell me to spare me unnecessary worry, and the bullies never mentioned it either, likely because the ringleader's dad was involved. It turns out that my mother had been having an affair with this man, who happened to be a surgeon at the same hospital where my mom worked as a front desk employee. People spotted them holding hands near their workplace, and the affair had apparently been going on since my freshman year of high school. Learning all of this shocked me, and I blamed myself for being so introverted. Knowing this earlier could have changed things for me back then. I'm disgusted by my mother's actions, especially because she lectured me about family loyalty while having an affair with a married man. She used this argument to make me feel guilty for calling the cops on her. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. Her boyfriend recently divorced his wife, and he and his younger son moved in with my mother afterward. The daughter who bullied me in high school moved away around the same time I did, so she probably doesn't know about this arrangement either. The whole story my mother told about this being a new relationship was a lie. She tried to deceive me into believing it had only been a few months, not 8 whole years. I'm completely disgusted and at a loss for words. My mother hasn't reached out to apologize or explain anything to me. I've gone ahead and filed a lawsuit against my mother for causing me emotional distress. Thankfully, I convinced my bosses to let me work remotely during this time, and I'm staying with a friend to save money on hotel bills. My mother found out about the lawsuit a few hours ago and is furious. She called me to ask what I thought I was doing, and I told her straight up. I'm seeking revenge for her turning her back on me when I needed her most. She refused to support me then, so now she'll have to compensate for it financially. Back then, she kept using our financial situation and her busy work schedule as excuses for not standing up for me against the bullies. Now that I know those were just excuses, I believe I deserve some compensation, especially since I'll need therapy in the future. She called me ungrateful and insisted her actions were justified, but she sounded unsure herself. I don't think she truly believes she's in the right. Even if I lose the lawsuit, I'll take satisfaction in knowing I stood up to her instead of letting it go as she always advised me to do. I'm reaching out to old classmates and teachers from high school, hoping they'll support me and help me win this case. I haven't heard anything from my mother's boyfriend or my high school bully, and I hope it stays that way because I have no desire to speak to them right now. My mother has been bombarding me with texts, insisting I'm making a mistake and will regret my actions forever. But I've made my decision and won't take it back now. Today, I guess she sent her boyfriend's daughter as a peace offering. thinking she could resolve the issue since she's the one who bullied me in the first place. My mother believed that sending her to apologize would make me forgive her, but that's not how it works. The visit was incredibly awkward. I had nothing to say to her and didn't want her to talk to me or apologize. Truth be told, I was okay with holding onto my resentment forever because her insults from high school still bothered me after all these years and likely always will. She started by apologizing for her behavior in high school, admitting she was immature and dumb back then, and wanted my forgiveness. I didn't truly mean it, but I told her I forgave her and asked her to leave since I had nothing else to discuss. Instead, she stayed and suggested that since I forgave her, I should forgive my mother too, just like she forgave her dad for cheating on her mom and stayed in his life. The truth is, she only forgave her dad because he was wealthy, and she wanted to benefit financially. Her mom settled their divorce without much fuss because of the money she received in the settlement and ongoing alimony. I pointed this out, and she got defensive, accusing me of being jealous that my mother never spent money on me despite her dad sending money every month during high school. I grew up thinking we were poor, but my mom had a wealthy boyfriend and kept her spending secret. My high school bully seemed unhappy after letting this slip, but I heard it loud and clear, and we both knew it would come up in court. I told her to leave me alone, and she did, warning me that I was making a big mistake by cutting out the only family I had left. Fortunately, I no longer consider my mother family, so it doesn't matter to me. If my mother had stood by me when I asked her to, we wouldn't be in this situation. She only thought about herself, and now here we are. It's been a challenging couple of weeks, I won't sugarcoat it. I've been working tirelessly day and night to gather evidence proving my mother treated me awfully. I juggle my job during the day and collaborate with my lawyer whenever needed, which has made everything tense. The final hearing date is approaching rapidly, and I've managed to substantiate all my claims with solid proof. My mother's lawyer, funded by her boyfriend, is putting up a strong defense with the best family lawyer money can buy. This has extended the legal process more than expected, but I remain confident in my truth. I'm incredibly stressed right now, hoping that the upcoming meeting will go well and finally put an end to this ordeal. Once this is over, my mother will be out of my life for good. She stopped texting me, and both she and her boyfriend, along with his daughter, are actively spreading negativity about me online, trying to turn people against me. Despite this, I have the truth on my side. Additionally, my underdog image from high school seems to be working in my favor, as people refuse to believe I'm the ungrateful, selfish person they want me to be seen as. I'm hopeful that I'll win this case. It would be a monumental victory for me, not just financially, but emotionally too. Finally triumphing over those who tried to ruin my life would make all the effort worthwhile. I'm thrilled to share that I won my case, and my mother ended up paying me $50,000 in damages for the intentional emotional distress she caused me. It still feels surreal, but it's true. I made sure to settle my legal fees first and also gig my friend, who graciously let me stay with her, a token of my appreciation with some of the money. Next week, I'm finally flying back to my real home, and I can leave all this behind. My mother and her boyfriend aren't happy about the outcome, judging by their social media posts where they claim the law unfairly punished her for being a good parent trying to support her supposedly greedy and immoral daughter. Despite their words, they wish me well. As for my high school bully, they've now blocked me. It doesn't bother me anymore because their opinions hold no weight now that I've emerged victorious. They lost and I won. That's a defeat they'll have to live with for the rest of their lives. My mother-in-law mocked me as just a trophy wife at her anniversary party. My husband Mark and I have been together for nearly 8 years and are quite happy in our marriage. However, there's always been conflict with my husband's parents. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law has always harbored negative feelings towards me since we got engaged. My father-in-law was kind, but he tended to let my mother-in-law dominate and mostly kept to himself. My husband comes from a wealthier background than I do, and my mother-in-law has always used this as a reason to dislike me. She would act as if my middle-class family background was somehow wrong, making comments about my appearance, outfits, or shoes. Initially, I wasn't self-conscious about these things, but her constant comments made me start buying expensive clothes specifically for occasions when I had to see her, hoping to avoid her pitying looks. Once, I wore a white shirt that she had seen me wear a month ago, and she made a comment about me repeating clothes, suggesting that wealthy people don't do this. My husband tried to intervene, but my mother-in-law would knowingly make these comments in front of others to embarrass me. She even insisted on taking me shopping and bought me clothes I didn't like. I accepted them graciously, hoping to build a positive relationship with her. However, things escalated when I got a great job early in our relationship, significantly improving our lifestyle. My mother-in-law was not happy and demanded to know exactly how much I was earning, insisting that women should earn less than their husbands. I pointed out that my job in pharmaceuticals was lucrative and that I might even earn more than Mark in the long run. My mother-in-law then told me I could keep my job for now, but once I married Mark, I would have to quit to avoid family gossip. This outdated view made me laugh, as Mark fully supported my career. I eventually talked to Mark about how uncomfortable his mother's behavior made me feel. Mark was furious when he found out his mother had been contacting me like this. He spoke with her, after which she called me, accusing me of trying to come between her and Mark and calling me names. She even threatened not to let Mark marry someone like me and demanded that I leave him. I ended the call and blocked her number, feeling exhausted by her toxic behavior. It was a significant warning sign. Despite this, Mark and I didn't break up, but I started questioning what kind of mother he had grown up with. Over the years, I couldn't completely avoid mother-in-law because of family events where Mark was invited and I had to go. She would ignore me completely, acting as though I didn't exist. For instance, at Mark's cousin's birthday party, everyone greeted us warmly, but mother-in-law would rush to hug Mark, asking about his day. If Mark tried to involve me, she quickly changed the subject. I noticed a pattern where she'd often bring up her supposed health issues, telling Mark how old and frail she felt despite being perfectly healthy. It was strange how she manipulated her son for attention. When Mark proposed after years of dating, he invited everyone to our engagement party. While my family was thrilled, Mark's parents weren't as enthusiastic. Mother-in-law arrived with a sour expression, which darkened further when she saw my engagement ring. She criticized Mark for buying me a larger ring than the one father-in-law had given her. Father-in-law tried to calm her down, but mother-in-law continued, implying that her son couldn't do anything right for her, but was overly generous to me. I couldn't tolerate her disrespect, so I firmly told her to leave if she couldn't show respect. Mother-in-law was shocked by my response, but I wasn't going to let her ruin such a joyous occasion in front of my family. Father-in-law escorted her out while she kept calling for Mark, who stood by my side. Later on, my mother-in-law called Mark to apologize, claiming she was drunk, even though we all knew she rarely drank, because she was apologizing to both of us. We decided to let it go. Then came the wedding planning. My mother-in-law insisted on being part of my dress shopping, claiming she had always wanted to do this. By this point, my patience with her was wearing thin, but I couldn't disrespect her outright since she was my fiance's mother. So I reluctantly allowed her to come along, warning my mother and cousin to be prepared for any antics. As expected, my mother-in-law had issues with my dress choices. She criticized my dress as unsophisticated, demanding I wear a more traditional white dress. I stood my ground, and my mother defended me, reminding her that I wasn't her daughter and she should keep her opinions to herself. My mother-in-law sulked in a corner like a toddler, making nasty comments throughout my fitting. In the end, I chose a dress and paid for it. My mother-in-law then had the audacity to tell me she was glad I picked that dress because it made my arms look fat, giggling at her own comment. My patient mother finally snapped and scolded her for her immature behavior. I was close to tears. No one wants to hear hurtful comments about their dream dress, especially when it's untrue. We informed her that she would need to find her own way home since I had driven everyone that day and refused to let her ride with us, knowing she would continue to criticize me. She panicked, but I stood firm. While driving my mother home, Mark called me, upset, asking how I could abandon his mother and that she had called him in tears, accusing me of leaving her on purpose. I promised to explain everything when I got home, but he continued to criticize me. My mother, hearing everything on speakerphone, intervened, listing all of my mother-in-law's behavior throughout the day, asking Mark if this was how respected adults behaved. Mark was embarrassed, realizing he didn't know the full story. Clearly, my mother-in-law hadn't told him everything. Later, when Mark returned home, he apologized again, explaining that he panicked at the thought of his mother being left alone. I reassured him that I wouldn't have done that if his mother hadn't been nasty to me all day. Mark hugged me and offered to uninvite his mother from the wedding if I wanted. But I hesitated because I didn't want to exclude his father, who might not attend if his wife wasn't invited. Before the wedding, we spoke to Mark's father and explained that if Mark's mother's behavior became unacceptable during the wedding, he would need to intervene. Mark's father understood and sympathized with our situation, and I felt sorry for him having to deal with his wife's behavior constantly. Surprisingly, my mother-in-law behaved well during the wedding, boasting to everyone about our grand celebration as if she had paid for it. However, during the wedding toast, Mark's father made it clear that they hadn't contributed financially and praised us for our hard work. He expressed pride in his accomplished daughter-in-law, which irked my mother-in-law. During the father-daughter dance, my dad and I enjoyed a dance, and everyone applauded. Just as Mark was about to join us, my mother-in-law interrupted, insisting on dancing with her son first. Mark obliged, dancing with her. Later at the wedding, my mother-in-law congratulated me, and when she randomly commented that my arms didn't look that fat in my dress, I politely smiled, though it irked me. I didn't want her mean remarks to spoil my special day. Overall, despite some tension, everyone had a good time at the wedding, dancing, and perhaps drinking a bit too much. The next day, I woke up to several messages from my mother-in-law, accusing me of embarrassing her during the wedding celebration and insisting that I needed to do better if I wanted to be part of her family. Despite feeling a bit hungover, I recalled the events of the night clearly and knew I hadn't done anything embarrassing. I even called my parents to confirm, and they assured me everything was fine and everyone had enjoyed themselves. When my husband woke up, I showed him the messages, and he advised me to ignore them. Feeling suspicious, I pressed him to explain what my mother-in-law meant. That's when Mark revealed that throughout the night, she had been coming to him, commenting on how I was having too much fun, especially when dancing with my cousins. She even suggested jokingly that I was like a wild horse, and that Mark needed to control me now that we were married. Mark dismissed her remarks at the time and urged me to do the same. But I was deeply offended by her insinuations about my behavior at my own wedding. I wanted to confront her immediately, but Mark and I were leaving for our honeymoon, so I decided to set aside my feelings for the time being. Our honeymoon was wonderful, and we had a great time together. Upon returning from our honeymoon, my mother-in-law called me, sweetly inquiring about how the trip went, unusual since she rarely reached out to me. I took the opportunity to express my displeasure about her comments to Mark on our wedding night. She quickly dismissed it, claiming she meant no harm, and then proceeded to pry for details about our honeymoon, asking if we had plenty of alone time. I asked her directly to be honest with me and told her that I didn't think our honeymoon details were any of her business. When my mother-in-law persisted, claiming she just wanted to know if she would be a grandmother soon, I was taken aback for several reasons. First, we had just gotten married. It hadn't even been a week, and she already expected me to start having children to fulfill her dream of becoming a grandmother. Second, both Mark and I had always been clear that we didn't want kids. This was a decision we had made long before we got serious with each other, and our stance hadn't changed. We had never explicitly told our parents about our decision because we considered it our private matter. As my mother-in-law continued to push, insisting that I needed to get pregnant quickly because my biological clock was ticking and these were my best years for having a baby, I cringed inwardly. Then she crossed a serious boundary by suggesting that Mark and I should stop using condoms, an incredibly inappropriate thing for her to say. I shut her down immediately, ending the conversation. When I told Mark about it, he was furious. He called his mother to confront her and honestly admitted that we didn't want children. As expected, my mother-in-law reacted explosively, screaming and hurling insults over the phone. She threatened that if we didn't give her a grandchild, she wouldn't leave us anything in her will. Mark calmly informed her that she had no assets of her own due to a prenuptial agreement with his father, so her threats were empty. My mother-in-law then turned her anger towards me, blaming me for not fulfilling my duty as a woman to give my husband a child. She used hurtful language, calling me faulty. Mark intervened, telling her to stop, but she continued her tirade, accusing us of destroying her dreams and questioning why we even got married if we didn't want children. Finally, Mark put his foot down and firmly told his mother that he was done with her behavior. He made it clear that she couldn't speak to me that way anymore. After Mark confronted his mother and made it clear that he was cutting her off due to her ongoing disrespect towards me, We stayed true to our decision and severed all contact with her. Mark's father did try to intervene initially, but after hearing our side of the story, he supported our choice. Over the years, my parents and Mark's father have maintained a relationship, but we never invited my mother-in-law into our lives or home. Fortunately, she respected our boundaries. In December of last year, we found out I was pregnant unexpectedly. Despite our initial feelings about not wanting children, we decided to go along with it since we were in a good place in our lives. When the news spread, everyone congratulated us, and my mother-in-law sent flowers and a letter of apology. She claimed to have reflected on her behavior and changed after undergoing therapy. However, I was skeptical of her supposed transformation and chose not to respond to her. Just 2 months into my pregnancy, I experienced a miscarriage. It was a devastating experience for us because, despite not planning for a child, we had already developed love and hopes for our baby. I was overwhelmed with grief and didn't know how to cope. Mark and my parents were incredibly supportive, staying by my side throughout this difficult time. My mother stayed with us for days because she understood how difficult it was for me to even get out of bed. Slowly, with Mark's unwavering support, I began to heal and process my emotions. Recently, Mark's father invited us to his and my mother-in-law's 25th wedding anniversary. It was a significant event for the family, and everyone was invited. However, Mark and I decided not to attend because we knew the topic of our miscarriage would likely come up, and it would be too painful to revisit that day and explain our grief to everyone again. Father-in-law pleaded with us to attend his and mother-in-law's 25th wedding anniversary celebration, urging us to take a night off for ourselves and relax. Reluctantly, we agreed, knowing it would be the first time seeing my mother-in-law after cutting ties with her for years. However, I was already struggling with my own grief and didn't have the energy to dwell on her or her behavior. When we arrived, my mother-in-law warmly greeted Mark with a hug, but was noticeably cold towards me. I brushed it off and found a seat, letting Mark catch up with his mother. During dinner, conversation naturally revolved around people sharing their good news and life updates. Mark's cousin announced her pregnancy, which was difficult for me to hear. As everyone congratulated her, my mother-in-law unexpectedly stood up with a microphone to give a toast. She expressed happiness about being surrounded by loved ones and then congratulated Mark's cousin on her pregnancy. However, her tone shifted dramatically when she directed hurtful accusations towards me. She insinuated that I had done something to cause my miscarriage, claiming it couldn't have been a simple natural event. Mark and I were stunned and frozen by her cruelty. Mother-in-law continued, loudly stating that her son had settled for someone like me and that she had hoped our marriage would bring her grandchildren. She declared me nothing more than a trophy wife and openly expressed her anticipation for Mark to divorce me so she wouldn't have to see me at her next anniversary party. She then cheered and drank as if she had given a triumphant speech, leaving the entire room in shocked silence. As Mark confronted his mother about her behavior, their conversation escalated into a heated argument. She continued to blame me while Mark tried to defend me, pointing out how ridiculous she was being. I felt overwhelmed with shame and embarrassment, and tears streamed down my face. It was all too much to handle, and I was flooded with emotions. Mother-in-law mocked my tears, dismissing them as an act because no one would believe my sob story anyway. Suddenly, Mark's father, who had been silently observing, stood up and called for everyone to calm down. He announced that he needed to speak his mind and revealed that he had endured suffering for 25 years of marriage. That night had opened his eyes, and he declared that he was done with it all. Update 1. I never expected my original post to gain so much attention. It's been eye-opening to hear from so many people who have shared their own stories of dealing with toxic mothers-in-law. It's truly baffling why a parent would behave that way towards their child's partner. I want to clarify something. Please don't criticize my husband. He's done his best to stand up for me whenever possible. Dealing with an overbearing, controlling, and toxic parent is incredibly challenging. I was fortunate to have loving parents, but my husband didn't have the same experience. He grew up thinking his mother's behavior was normal and has been protective of me in his own way. I also want to express my gratitude to everyone who shared their experiences with miscarriage. I'm genuinely sorry for all those who have gone through this heartbreaking loss. I've been struggling with feelings of guilt, even though I know it wasn't my fault. I realize now that seeking help from a therapist is important, and I plan to do so. I'm also looking into joining forums where other moms who have experienced miscarriage can offer support and understanding. Feeling seen and understood by others who have been through similar situations will be invaluable to me. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my last update, and my father-in-law has officially served divorce papers to my mother-in-law. He's been staying with us during this time, and he's actually a wonderful house guest. I can see where my husband gets his sense of humor from. Father-in-law also enjoys cooking, so sometimes he has dinner ready when I come back from work. Mark was truly fortunate to have him, and I can't understand why my mother-in-law would let go of such a gem like him. When Mark and his father went to serve her the divorce papers, she refused to even look at them. Mark told me that she yelled at them, claiming they had no right to cut her off. She justified her hurtful comments about me by saying she only wanted good things for our family. Mark chose to ignore her outbursts and helped his father pack his things. Mother-in-law's anger escalated as she started throwing things and yelling. Father-in-law threatened to involve the police because technically it was his house. Hearing this, she quieted down, realizing she had nowhere else to go. After the party, no one reached out to her except to criticize her behavior. Everyone understood that her accusations against me being a trophy wife were false, especially considering my successful career. They also empathized with my pain from the miscarriage. Mother-in-law's own actions left her with no family or friends left to support her. She's tried to beg father-in-law to reconcile, but he's made it clear he wants nothing to do with her. My parents spoke to mother-in-law after learning what she did to me. They warned her that they would take legal action against her for harassing and defaming me publicly. My mom isn't one to stay quiet, and she told her exactly what she thought. Knowing my parents, I trust they'll follow through on their words and take her to court if necessary. For my sake, I hope she stays away from me. Last update. It's been 8 months since my last update, and I want to thank everyone who has supported me through this journey. Father-in-law is now officially divorced and free from my mother-in-law. They had a prenuptial agreement, so she couldn't take anything that wasn't rightfully hers. Father-in-law agreed to let her keep their joint account and the car, but when she demanded the house, he and his lawyer dismissed her request because the house belonged to him before they were married. Mark heard that she's currently staying with one of his cousins while she looks for a new place to live. She has more than enough money to support herself comfortably. Mother-in-law has mostly stayed away from us, although we hear she tries to reach out to others with her version of events to gain sympathy. As far as we're concerned, she can do whatever she wants. Mark and I are doing really well. I followed through with therapy, and it's helped me connect with new friends who understand me. Mark has also started therapy to work through his own past issues. Our careers are on track, and we're grateful for everything we have right now.
My name is Anna, and I'm 32 years old, a working housewife living with my husband and son. I joined my current company right after graduating, and this year marks my 10th anniversary with them. I took maternity leave when my son was born, returning to work when he turned 1, and I've been actively working in sales ever since. Recently, my hard work has been paying off, and I'm on the brink of a promotion, which makes work even more enjoyable for me. However, my husband, who is 3 years younger, is the opposite. He has been changing jobs frequently, believing it's essential for his future entrepreneurial pursuits. Despite this, his salary has been decreasing with each job change. Initially, things went well between us during our first 2 years of marriage, but my husband's unstable work situation made us financially insecure. He talked a lot about dreams of starting a business, building our own house, and traveling abroad, which I found enjoyable. But his demeanor changed after our son was born. While I was on maternity and childcare leave, everything seemed manageable. However, when I returned to work, life became overwhelmingly busy. I was responsible for preparing breakfast, dropping our child off at daycare, working full-time, picking up our child, stopping at the supermarket, and preparing dinner, all with little time to catch my breath. Despite my busy schedule, my husband ignored my efforts. He refused to help with daycare drop-offs or pickups, fearing what others might think of him having too much time on his hands. Despite my attempts to explain that modern fathers are involved in childcare, he remained adamant. I worked tirelessly, managing household chores, childcare, and work responsibilities, all for the sake of my family. Unfortunately, my husband's father was the only one who understood and supported me, but he was working far away. My mother-in-law, a traditional housewife, didn't appreciate my decision to continue working after giving birth and sided with her son. It was clear she felt frustrated by my professional success compared to her son's frequent job changes and lack of success. This situation left me feeling unsupported and misunderstood within my own family. Every time I encountered my mother-in-law, she would make cutting remarks, suggesting that I should prioritize my roles as a wife and mother over my career. It seemed she couldn't comprehend that we couldn't sustain our lifestyle solely on my husband's income. As time went on, her comments became more pointed, implying it was unfortunate to leave our child in daycare so late or suggesting I should quit my job altogether. Perhaps due to my father-in-law's prolonged absence for work, my mother-in-law had ample free time. She would casually drop by our house, make her critical remarks, and then leave. Dealing with her constant blame was mentally taxing, and I had nearly resigned myself to not being understood by people with old-fashioned perspectives like hers. However, it turned out that my husband was also affected by my success at work. When I shared news of my accomplishments and pay raise, his response was lackluster, barely acknowledging my achievements. Instead, he began making remarks like, "Don't get too full of yourself just because you earn a bit more than me. What's the point of my daily grind?" Enduring the combined criticism from both my husband and mother-in-law became unbearable, and I started to regret my marriage. To make matters worse, my husband started arriving home later and later, sometimes well past midnight, despite working at a factory with standard business hours. When I questioned him about these late nights, he would simply claim he was working and become defensive when pressed for details, shutting down any further discussion. Then came the incident that I had missed noticing. One evening, my mother-in-law unexpectedly showed up at our house, as she often did unannounced. However, that day was particularly difficult for me. I had stayed up late preparing a lunchbox for my son's sports day at daycare, feeling exhausted and wanting an early rest, especially with an important business negotiation scheduled for the next day. My son, worn out from the sports day, had already fallen asleep in his room by the time my mother-in-law arrived. As my exhausted body moved towards the kitchen to serve tea to my unexpected guest, my husband suddenly grabbed my arm tightly, surprising me. He insisted that he would take care of it, a rare offer considering he seldom cooked or helped around the house, especially when I was tired. I assumed he was merely trying to impress his mother with this uncharacteristic gesture and attempted to brush it off, but he wouldn't release my arm. Forcefully, he directed me to sit on the sofa, raising his voice to emphasize that I needed to rest. I was perplexed by his abrupt actions. If my husband served the tea, I knew my mother-in-law would criticize me for not fulfilling my role as a hostess. To my surprise, my mother-in-law intervened, urging me to sit down while she smiled kindly. As they exchanged these unexpected pleasantries, my husband began preparing the tea in the kitchen. Their behavior was so out of character that I couldn't help but feel something was amiss. When my husband returned with the tea, smiling warmly, I observed him closely. It seemed like he kept glancing at me, and my mother-in-law appeared unusually fidgety. I sensed there was more to this situation than met the eye. As I reached for the teacup, I realized my husband was up to something. Their sudden change in demeanor was too orchestrated to be genuine. Determined not to play along with their scheme, I decided to take charge. I casually mentioned that we might have some tea sweets in the fridge that my mother-in-law would enjoy. Normally, my husband wouldn't bother with tea sweets for guests, but today was different. He seemed momentarily puzzled but quickly headed back to the kitchen at my suggestion. My mother-in-law, echoing my sentiments, expressed concern about the inconvenience they were causing. They both retreated to the kitchen, seizing the opportunity I had created. When my husband returned, I finally lifted the teacup to my lips. As we engaged in idle conversation, sharing videos of the day's sports festival, I noticed my husband and mother-in-law observing me with unnatural interest. Despite the unsettling gazes directed at me, I calmly finished my tea, all the while noticing my husband's bewildered expression. I expected that time would pass without incident, but as anticipated, something unusual occurred. Suddenly, my mother-in-law, who had been chatting cheerfully moments before, grew pale and began to frown. Abruptly standing, she clutched her stomach and rushed out of the living room towards the bathroom. I couldn't help but smirk. I had suspected as much. Glancing at my husband, I noticed his shock and wide eyes. After giving me a brief glare, he hurriedly followed my mother-in-law, banging on the bathroom door and calling out anxiously. Meanwhile, I could hear my mother-in-law moaning in pain from inside the bathroom, though her words were indistinct. However, I had a strong inkling of what was happening. After a few tense minutes, my husband returned to the living room, leaving my mother-in-law still in the bathroom. His face was pale, his lips pressed tightly together. Seizing the moment, I calmly addressed him. "It seems the tea you prepared had quite a dangerous ingredient, doesn't it? So, it's really your fault after all." His eyes widened in shock as he retorted, "You suspected me? You're the worst wife." Amused by his absurd accusation, I replied, "You're the one who initiated this whole thing. The tea you brewed for me was so suspicious that I simply swapped it with your mother's cup." He spat back, "You're the worst." I couldn't contain my laughter at his feeble argument. I had sensed something was awry when I noticed a strange powder residue in the teacup he served. Upon closer inspection, it confirmed my suspicions. If you were someone who regularly made tea, I wouldn't have suspected a thing. But you don't usually handle household chores, and your mother seems to believe wives should do everything. I couldn't fathom that they had conspired to actually give me a break. That's why I meticulously observed my husband's actions and the tea he served. After my husband confessed, it turned out his motive was incredibly trivial. Aware of my important business negotiation the next day, he and my mother-in-law had schemed to sabotage my work. Had their plan succeeded, I might have been forced to cancel the negotiation due to illness or endure embarrassing consequences during the meeting. It was a despicable act, jeopardizing my reputation at the company. Even so, putting foreign substances in someone's drink was undeniably criminal. It's bewildering why my husband and mother-in-law went to such lengths against me, but it's simply pathetic. My husband confessed everything and then threatened to claim damages from me if anything happened to his mother. Huh? What are you talking about? You're the one who should pay the damages, don't you think so? I retorted with a snort. I had suspected my husband of having an affair for some time. Despite claiming to work late or being busy even on his days off, he showed little interest in our family and spent most of his time on his smartphone. So I hired an investigator, and as I expected, he was indeed having an affair. He had met a young woman at a matchmaking event, lied about starting his own company, and began dating her. The woman, fresh out of school and naive, fell for his lies. Later, my husband justified his actions by claiming he needed to regain his confidence by dating a younger woman, likely boasting about his future CEO status. Seeing my husband freeze and turn pale when I confronted him about his affair, I decided it was time for a divorce. "Let's get a divorce. You'll have to pay child support," I told him, and he reluctantly agreed. Then he had the audacity to demand half of my secret savings after the divorce. "Why do I have to hand over my assets to you?" I asked incredulously. "Money saved before marriage is not subject to property division. Most of that savings is from when I was single," I explained. Upon hearing this, my husband was disappointed. I then made it clear that he couldn't take any furniture or appliances from our home, all purchased with my money, and the house was rented in my name. As my mother-in-law emerged from the bathroom, I informed her that I would be reporting the incident to my father-in-law. She pleaded with me to keep it a secret from her son, but I ignored her and contacted my father-in-law immediately. He was furious and demanded a divorce from my mother-in-law. Meanwhile, my husband finally realized the gravity of his situation upon learning he wouldn't receive any property division. He pleaded with me, kneeling and crying, but it was too late to change my mind. I hired a lawyer and successfully divorced him, ensuring I received child support. Due to his low income, he ended up with a substantial debt. Moreover, both he and my mother-in-law were convicted of assault for the laxative incident and received suspended sentences, tarnishing their records. His mistress also lost affection for him, and now he works tirelessly to pay off debts, leading a miserable life. My mother-in-law, abandoned by my father-in-law, faced the consequences of her actions. Despite the challenges, I was promoted to leader of the sales team thanks to a successful negotiation. I moved out with my son and now live happily in a new apartment. Although my first marriage ended in failure, I am determined to balance work and parenting and seize happiness from now on.
Relying on me for money and never lifting a finger for housework or childcare. My younger husband Oliver would go out with his friends every weekend. I mean, he's young. What can you do? That was my excuse until I found out he was actually going on trips with his affair partner, not his friends. I'm going to crash at my buddy's place in Chicago for a bit. He just moved there for work. Take care of the spring cleaning while I'm gone, will you? That was the lie he told me before leaving for his scandalous trip. Furious, I decided to kick him out, belongings and all, while he was away. What happened to him next was something neither of us could have predicted. My name is Sophia, a 29-year-old housewife with a family of 3. Oliver, who's 3 years younger than me, and our 2-year-old daughter. I met Oliver at work. He was the new guy, and I became his mentor. He was charming, persistent, even when corrected, and hardworking, and oh, was he good-looking. It seemed like people were always gathering around him, drawn to his idol-like beauty and outgoing personality. I was dedicated to my job and didn't even wear makeup. I never had a boyfriend, so I didn't think someone as attractive and well-liked as Oliver would ever be interested in me. Nonetheless, I started watching makeup tutorials, got some fashion tips from stylish friends, and tried to become the kind of woman he'd find appealing. About 6 months after my transformation began, he noticed. "You look really beautiful lately. Found someone special?" I was speechless. He followed up with, "Would you consider making me that special someone?" Of course I said yes. We started dating and got married within a year. Marrying Oliver felt like a teenage dream, and I naively thought he must be my soulmate, but reality proved otherwise. Even when we were dating, Oliver was a bit of a baby, always looking for affection. Whether it was holding hands, cuddling, or even paying the bill at restaurants, it always fell on me. I thought, why can't you do it yourself? But when he would plead, "Please, Sophia, you're the only one I can ask," I would always give in. Maybe it was his good looks or his unique sweet charm that made me so accommodating. After we married, the responsibilities became more lopsided. Even though both of us worked, the household chores were all on me. Finances, about 70% from me and 30% from him. He spent what was left of his income after household expenses all on his hobbies, seemingly without saving a dime. I was mostly saving the remainder of my income, thinking of our future home and children. At first I thought, well, he lived with his parents and I lived alone, so it's understandable that we have different experience levels when it comes to chores. Besides, he earns less than I do, so it makes sense, and he's still young, probably not thinking about the future yet. But even when I got pregnant, Oliver's lifestyle didn't change. Doing household chores while pregnant was really tough, on top of the exhaustion from working during pregnancy. Morning sickness hit me hard in the first trimester. In the third trimester, it was difficult even to bend over, and just standing was tiring. Yet Oliver never offered to help. Worse, when I hinted that I could use some help, he'd say, "I'm so grateful for you, Sophia. I'm not good with housework, so I'm lucky to have married you," undermining my will to ask for help. Maybe it was my fault for enabling him. Even after our daughter was born, Oliver didn't change. I quit my job after giving birth, and it was understood that I would handle both baby care and household chores. Yet Oliver would still stay out late, hang out with friends, and go on trips as if he were single. Still, I forgave him everything because of the occasional kind words and the annual birthday trips he took me on. I guess when our daughter grows up, he'll realize the importance of family, I thought. I realized how naive I'd been when our daughter turned 2. I was attending a high school friend's wedding that day. I had wanted to leave our daughter with Oliver, but as usual, he had plans. So I left her with my mom. The wedding was in a chapel in Boston, and the reception was at a French restaurant with several large private rooms, a venue chosen long ago by my foodie friend. The wedding went smoothly, but while transitioning to the reception, I saw him. He was walking arm in arm with a woman in a chic black dress, looking more than just friendly. I couldn't stand to be at the reception after that, and made an excuse about our daughter being sick to leave early. The image of them haunted me. Oliver had said he was going on a trip with an old college friend, but I suspected infidelity. I knew Oliver had many female friends, but this was different. His old college friend was supposed to be a man, and he definitely hadn't gone on any bike trip. Lying to meet up with another woman was suspicious. If he had been lying to me all along, then my resentment surged. Even when I was struggling with house chores during morning sickness or overwhelmed by new motherhood, was he cheating on me? I couldn't take it anymore. My love for him instantly cooled, and I resolved to expose his affair once and for all. I called my parents to keep my daughter for one more day, debating whether to tell the truth, and decided to wait until I had proof and lied about being sick. The next day, I visited a private investigator. I handed over Oliver's photos, shared his workplace details, and his background. I needed to dig deep into his life, I requested. The private investigator advised me to act normal around Oliver until I finished my investigation, ensuring he didn't suspect anything. I didn't want to look at Oliver's face, so right after picking up my daughter, I retreated to our bedroom. When he came home late that night, he saw me and asked, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" His voice pretended concern. Had this been from a couple of days ago, I might have felt loved and comforted by his words. But knowing the truth, they meant nothing to me. 2 weeks later, the private investigator contacted me. "Oliver has been having an affair for the past 2 years," he said. The other woman was a married older nurse, and the restaurant where I spotted them was a regular haunt for their monthly rendezvous, which had been ongoing for about 2 years. I was shocked that she was married, but according to the investigator, her work as a nurse made it easier to conceal the affair. What shocked me even more was that this nurse worked at the hospital where my daughter was born. It may be a coincidence, but it's the same hospital as my 2-year-old daughter. Something felt creepily coincidental about the affair lasting 2 years and us having a 2-year-old daughter. That day, I decided to divorce Oliver and started plotting my plan. "I'm staying at my junior colleague's place in Chicago for the night. Make sure you clean the house," Oliver told me. Normally, I'd be annoyed that he pushed spring cleaning on me during a busy time, but I secretly smiled, relishing my own scheme. "Sure, I'll bring back souvenirs," I replied, waving goodbye as he left. Oliver seemed oblivious. Back inside, I told my daughter, "We're going on a trip. Let's go see the ocean." My daughter, who loves fish, cheered, "Yay, ocean." "First, let's take a little nap," I said, laying her down. I continued my preparations, packing my bags and Oliver's, ensuring he wouldn't notice. I sorted items into boxes but couldn't touch shower, bedroom, or living room items. Finally, I disassembled the baby crib, laid my daughter in her stroller, and called the movers. My stuff went to my parents' home, and Oliver's got discarded. Apart from the built-in appliances, the apartment was empty. I headed to a hotel overlooking the ocean in another state, somewhere my daughter had always wanted to visit. Our travel essentials had already arrived in the room. My daughter kept saying, "Yay, ocean," as she looked out the window, watching the sunset over the sea. I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Exhausted from packing and the journey, we went to bed early. Before sleeping, I sent Oliver an email, a picture of him and his mistress. Despite sleeping early, I woke up at midday, rushing to check on my daughter. I found her gripping the crib bars, looking at the ocean with such focus that I had to laugh. I had planned to eat out for lunch, but since my daughter couldn't tear herself away from the window, I ordered room service. She was clearly enamored with her fish-themed kids' meal and took her sweet time eating it, looking happy throughout. Just then, I received a call from Oliver. Ignoring it, I texted him, "I have no plans to live with you anymore. Best of luck with your new love interest." More calls from Oliver kept coming in. Annoyed, I blocked his number. After finishing lunch, I took my daughter to play by the sea. By the time we got back to the hotel, it was dark outside. Checking my neglected phone, I saw that my brother had tried to reach me. When I called him back, he told me that Oliver had rushed home to our empty apartment after reading my email. Apparently, Oliver then went to my parents' house, thinking I'd be there. but I was on vacation with our daughter, so only my fuming parents and brother were there. After they heard about Oliver's affair, my brother chuckled, saying Oliver looked so down it was actually funny. Oliver got chewed out by my parents, and as he was leaving, my brother told him all future communications would go through my attorney, handing him a business card. Oliver apparently tried to punch my brother, saying, "Don't make decisions for me." This was something I'd asked my brother to do, so it wasn't just his unilateral decision. My brother dodged the punch and Oliver stumbled, slamming his shoulder into the doorway. He was in so much pain that my brother took him to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with a compound fracture and is currently in surgery. During all this, my brother had managed to collect Oliver's mobile phone. It was in my name because I'd been footing most of Oliver's bills. Just skimmed through it and saw some pretty outrageous messages, my brother said. Apparently, there were messages from Oliver like, "We'll be apart for a while, but let's hang in there. I only love you, so I won't have another affair. Do the same for me." The next morning, my daughter and I had a lot of fun at the beach. Tired out, I left her with my mother at my parents' home and went to see Oliver in the hospital. I didn't really want to see him, but his parents were visiting and I felt this was the only chance to settle things. Upon arriving at the hospital, Oliver's parents, who had heard everything, looked at me apologetically but said nothing as I walked into the hospital room. Oliver began blurting out, "Sophia, it's not what you think. It's like prostitution." He claimed that he was only helping the woman financially in exchange for her pretending to be his girlfriend. According to Oliver, there was no emotional involvement. It was just for money, and they'd only been together twice, including the time I caught them. Frustrated but not surprised, I asked, "So where's the money then?" Pausing, Oliver finally said, It hasn't been transferred yet. It was supposed to happen after the third time." His clearly false statement just left me in disbelief. I wasn't even angry anymore. I hurled the additional proof photos I had brought just in case at him. Upon seeing the photos, his mother-in-law broke down crying. Ignoring the distraught mother-in-law, I slammed the pre-filled divorce papers down in front of a stunned Oliver. "I'm done with your lies. We're getting a divorce. I'll live with our daughter. We'll sort out the details like child support and asset division through lawyers later," I said, exiting the hospital room. Oliver's plea, "Wait, you're misunderstanding," fell on deaf ears. I felt incredibly relieved when I returned to discuss my claims against Oliver with the attorney. The attorney chuckled and told me he'd been assigned to represent Charlotte, Oliver's affair partner's now ex-husband, which made for an awkward situation to address the financial matters. After the divorce, Oliver and I agreed on no division of assets, but a one-time payment of $330,000. We also decided he'd pay $300 a month in child support for the next 16 years until our daughter turns 18. If Oliver ever missed a payment, he'd have to pay the entire amount up front. My lawyer took care of the discussions, so I didn't have to see Oliver's face, a face I once loved but now never wanted to see again. Oliver apparently said things like, "I want to get back together, and I can't live without Sophia," according to my lawyer. Not once did he mention our daughter in all of this. After the divorce, I found remote work I could do from my parents' home while raising our daughter. She started preschool and was making progress with her speech. She never really talked about Oliver, probably because she doesn't remember spending time with him. My lawyer informed me that Oliver had abruptly paid the full child support amount. Shocked, I learned from my lawyer that Oliver had lost his job after his affair was leaked to his company by Charlotte's husband. He started working in a nightclub and met a wealthy patron who agreed to take care of him, including paying off his child support debt. "Oliver connecting with other women is unacceptable," the patron had said. My lawyer chuckled as he told me how Oliver showed up dressed to the nines, handing over the full amount in cash. 5 years later, when my daughter was in second grade, the police contacted me. Oliver had been arrested for theft and had named me as his emergency contact. At first, I wanted to decline, but the officer persuaded me, saying, "Maybe just talk to him once." Oliver looked frail when I saw him. His once handsome face was now haggard. Turns out the wealthy patron was married and chose to reconcile with her husband after their affair was discovered. I thought to myself, Oliver likes only people like that. She demanded Oliver pay back the compensation and support she had given him. Thrown out of his apartment penniless, Oliver resorted to theft. "I need your help," he pleaded. "I'm sorry, Sophia, is all I have left." But hearing his story, it all sounded like his own doing. I declined to act as his emergency contact and gave the police his parents' phone number before heading home. Apparently, his parents also refused to get involved, which means Oliver could face real jail time even as a first-time offender, the police informed me. But my decision remained the same. I have no intentions of rekindling things with Oliver, nor do I want to drag myself into this mess. People have suggested that I should remarry now that my daughter is older, but I know better. The experience with Oliver taught me that I can't trust my own judgment when it comes to people. I won't jeopardize my precious daughter's well-being. Fortunately, she has grown into a good person even without a father figure, though she's a bit rebellious lately and doesn't want to hold my hand. That's okay. I cherish the life I have now, living with my daughter and my parents.
My name is Rachel, and I'm just your average sophomore in college. My dad runs a hospital, my mom is a stay-at-home mom, and my younger brother and sister go to different high schools. So yeah, we're better off than most families, and I think that's a good thing. But even so, our family dynamics are far from ideal. I'll be home late again today, my dad says as he grabs his bag and puts on his shoes. My mom replies, watching him go, "All right, be careful." But dad leaves without even looking at mom's face. This scene has become so routine that none of us, my siblings or me, feel anything anymore. Dad, who seems to live for his work, rarely pays attention to home life. He hardly ever attended school events when I was younger, so we have all kind of given up on him. I think his attitude has been hard on Mom. "I'm heading out too, Mom," I say. "Okay, be careful," she responds. Yeah, I leave the house as usual, and once I'm out, I feel a slight sense of relief. I'm aware that I might start treating Mom coldly, just like Dad does, especially since Mom tends to worry about me a bit too much. I never felt this way in middle or high school, but since starting college, I've noticed it more. If I'm a bit late coming home from club activities or dinner with friends, or if she can't reach me while I'm at work, she becomes hysterical and blames me. It seems a bit excessive, but maybe Dad's coldness is the reason she's like this. Then one day, tragedy struck our family. "Oh, doctor, are you okay?" Mom was in distress. Dad collapsed suddenly at work. He was examined immediately and had to be admitted to his own hospital. Apparently, it was a temporary episode caused by overwork. Thankfully, with proper rest, he'd be fine. Seeing Dad lying there with his eyes closed, I felt a bit scared. It's not that I didn't believe the attending physician. I understood the diagnosis. Dad is always busy, as we all knew. He was too busy even to look at us. Our family should have known that. But still, when a family member collapses, it's natural to worry. And I think Mom felt the same way. She's been going to the hospital every night since Dad collapsed. "Oh, Rachel, you're home early today," Mom says. "Yeah, one of my classes got canceled." "I see. Your dad was awake just a moment ago, but he's asleep again." Mom says this with a gentle look on her face. But I can see she's clearly exhausted, no wonder. With all the housework and hospital visits, why don't you go home and rest, Mom? I can stay with Dad. We have leftovers for dinner, so you don't have to worry about that. When I say this, Mom looks a bit surprised and then nods in agreement. Really? Then maybe I will. Thank you, she says as she stands up from her chair and reaches for the door to leave the hospital room. But before opening it, she turns back to me and says, "Rachel, make sure you come home before it gets too late, okay?" "I will," I reply, with a slight smile. Mom nods and quickly opens the door so as not to wake Dad, then leaves the room. Mom's really tired, isn't she? I murmur to myself as I sit in the chair Mom was just in, looking at Dad's sleeping face. I never knew he looked like this when he sleeps, but that's understandable. I have never known any other version of Dad than the workaholic who's always busy. When I get home, surprisingly, my sister Natalie is already there. "Hey sis, you just got home." "Yeah, what about you, Natalie? No club activities today?" "Nope. We had a practice match yesterday. So dinner or shower first?" Natalie asks, twirling around in her petite frame. Seeing my cute sister, I feel a bit relieved and say with a small smile, Let's go for dinner first. Have you eaten yet? Yeah, I already ate. Christian is probably still studying at school. He should be back soon, though. It's exactly 7 o'clock p.m. My brother Christian will probably be home around 7:30 at the earliest. All right. Change into your loungewear and come to the living room. I prepared my special menu for today. Didn't we have leftovers from yesterday? Yeah, but it felt a bit bland, so I made some salad and soup too. The table is set with yesterday's leftovers along with freshly made salad and soup. Thanks, Natalie. It's delicious, I say with a slightly relaxed tone. Natalie washes the dishes with a slightly shy smile. Where's Mom? She already went to bed. Didn't even have dinner. Is she not feeling well? I don't know. She was already asleep in her room when I got home. And there were no dinner dishes, so I guess she didn't eat. She must be really tired, I say, looking down at my dinner, searching for the right words. Then Natalie speaks up with a somewhat serious tone. Ah, hey sis. Yeah, what's up? Don't you think Mom's been acting a bit strange lately? Do you think so? As I'm about to respond, Natalie, who has finished washing the dishes, sits down and continues. I mean, she is visiting Dad way too much. I get that she's worried, but he collapsed from overwork. She doesn't have to go every day. Isn't that a bit excessive? Well, that's just Mom being overly concerned. I start to say, searching for the right words to follow. But Natalie interrupts. I actually saw what was in Mom's bag when she was going to visit Dad the other day. And guess what I found? She places something on the table that she took out of her pocket. What is this? A few days later, after my college classes are all done, my mobile phone rings. It's Mom's number on the display. Hello, what's up? I answer. Rachel. Mom? She hesitates with a shaky voice, as if she's on the verge of hyperventilating. Mom tells me that Dad has passed away. Upon hearing this, I cancel all my plans and head to the hospital. When I arrive, I go to the room where Dad had been sleeping and open the door. Inside, the attending physician, the nurse in charge, and Mom are all looking down at Dad, who has his eyes closed. Noticing me, the attending physician speaks up. We're still investigating the details. This morning, the nurse noticed something was off when checking on him, despite our best efforts. As he says this, both the attending physician and the nurse bow their heads to Mom and me, tears in their eyes. Hearing these words, Mom clings to Dad's lifeless body, crying. I just keep looking at Dad's face, which looks as peaceful as if he's sleeping. After a while, my sister and brother arrive, both too shocked to speak or cry. Listening to the doctor's explanation with a surprisingly calm demeanor at the funeral that soon follows, a variety of people, including Dad's relatives, attend. I'm surprised at how many people show up, likely because Dad had been the director of the hospital. It feels like all these people had been a part of Dad's life. Sometime after the funeral, several of Dad's colleagues, a lawyer, and some relatives visit our home to discuss the inheritance. I happen to be home because my college classes are canceled, so although I'm not keen on it, I join Mom for the discussion. The conversation is very subdued, mainly focusing on legal matters regarding the inheritance. In this solemn atmosphere, Mom says, my husband passed away peacefully. We will use his inheritance wisely. The room falls silent for a moment, but then all of Dad's colleagues burst into inappropriate laughter. Both Mom and I are at a loss for words. After the laughter subsides, one of Dad's colleagues speaks up. I apologize for the laughter. It's just that what you said was so absurd. It made me laugh in indignation. What? So you actually believe you're entitled to his inheritance? That's what was so funny. The colleague looks at Mom with a calm gaze, confused. Mom replies sharply, What are you talking about? Of course I am. I am his wife, and he died from overwork. The colleague retorts, Here, quite the actress, aren't you? Mom glares at him, but then the colleague continues, What I'm saying is exactly what it sounds like, ma'am. Did you think we wouldn't notice? Be honest. What did you put in his IV? Mom is at a loss for words as another colleague speaks up. What I'm saying is exactly what it sounds like, ma'am. Did you think we wouldn't notice? Be honest. What did you put in his IV? What I'm saying is exactly what it sounds like, ma'am. Did you think we wouldn't notice? Be honest. What did you put in his IV? At this point, Mom raises her voice hysterically. Don't be ridiculous. Do you have any proof that I did such a thing? We do have proof, the colleague says, placing a plastic syringe next to the sports drink bottle. Huh. This syringe was found in the waiting room's trash can along with the bottle on the morning he passed away. But we medical professionals would never dispose of a used syringe in a regular trash can. He glares at Mom and continues, your fingerprints and the sports drink's ingredients were found on the syringe, and your fingerprints were also found on his IV, so you definitely tampered with it. As they say this, I stare at Mom. She can't say anything in response. Her silence is an admission of guilt. That day, Mom is taken away by the police. A few days later, I visit someone. Rachel, are you sure about this? The colleague asks. Yes, thank you for everything, I replied, bowing deeply to him. I was the one who tipped him off about the syringe. He had carefully investigated everything after the funeral. If it weren't for the janitor telling me about the syringe, I wouldn't have known either. But I feel guilty for taking your mother away from you, the colleague says remorsefully. It's okay. The mom at that time was no longer our mom, I explained, bowing again. I could only think of Mom, who had shed fake tears at the funeral, as a stranger. Now my siblings and I are living with our paternal grandfather. I hope to have a real family this time. Later, I visit Mom once to ask her why she did it. Then, Mom, why? I inquire. It's obvious. If everything had gone as planned, all of his inheritance would have been mine. I have been enduring and pretending all this time. Mom mutters to herself, clearly unhinged. Seeing her like this confirmed that her tears, words, and actions had all been lies. I realized she could never be part of the family again. Now my siblings and I are living with our paternal grandfather. I hope to have a real family this time.